Chapter 421. Everyone, please don't get angry. Guan Yingyan saw that Wei Guang's tone was not friendly. He was afraid that if this continued, the two sides would fight before the matter was cleared up. If that happened, the truth would never be revealed. Therefore he stood up and wanted to be a peacemaker. Commander Luo, Wei Guang's attitude may not be very good, but what he said is the truth. You want to search the entire city for one missing person. Isn't this too much? If the final result is that you still can't find the person you're looking for after turning the city upside down, how will you explain it then? Facing Guan Yingyan's question, Luo still shook his head expressionlessly. I can't guarantee whether I can find him or not, but I'm also acting on orders. If anyone dares to stop me, then they are my enemy. It's that simple, so I hope you can make it easy. Acting on orders. The moment these four words were said, Guan Yingyan, Ma Wei, and Wei Guang's expressions all changed dramatically. Who was Luo? He was the commander of the mercenary army, the most elite commander of the Cold Front. It could be said that he was the highest officer of this mercenary army. If even he had to say that he was acting on orders, then the answer to whose orders he was acting on seemed to be right in front of them. So, Zhongdang Duke is here? Guan Yingyan asked as he took a deep breath in his heart. Yes, he's here. Zhongdang Duke, please. Luo nodded. His task was originally to surround the three lords and the many Ming soldiers here. Since he had already done that, then the next stage was not his own stage, but to be handed over to the sixth young master. Following Luo's loud shout, a carriage, under the protection of many able-bodied men, slowly drove into the inner courtyard from the outside. Before this, all the obstacles that prevented the carriage from moving had been cleaned up. In the cellar of the small courtyard, Lu Si, dressed in the uniform of the brocade guard, was still interrogating Lu Jian, who was beaten black and blue and covered in blood. Brother, we were still a family 500 years ago. Just say what you want to say. Why do you have to suffer like this? It really makes my heart ache. Lu Si's voice echoed in Lu Jian's ears. Lu Jian, who was tied up, opened his eyes with great difficulty. His eyelashes fluttered and he seemed to be mumbling something. Seeing that Lu Jian was about to speak, Lu Si hurriedly moved his face closer, wanting to hear what was being said. Suddenly, a mouthful of saliva flew towards his face. Completely caught off guard, Lu Si was spat all over his face. When he sensed that there was blood in the saliva, he wiped it away forcefully before glaring angrily. Brat, you're refusing a toast only to be forced to drink a forfeit. Since that's the case, don't blame me for being impolite. Next, I'll make you beg for death. Men, continue the torture. Lu Si was so enraged that he ignored Lu Jian's injuries and wanted to torture him. He wanted to see if this person was made of iron. Did he really not know what pain was? Boom. Just as he finished speaking, an embroidered uniform guard approached step by step with a thin whip that was dipped in salt water. Suddenly, the cellar door was broken from the outside. Following that, a powerful man appeared in their line of sight. The man was tall and muscular, and his muscular body gave people a feeling of explosive power. As soon as he appeared, he charged forward like a mad bull. First, the embroidered uniform guard with the whip only saw a black shadow getting bigger and bigger in his eyes. Then, before he could do anything to dodge, he felt a sharp pain all over his body. It was as if all his ribs were broken at this moment. His whole body flew backwards because of this. With just one collision, he heavily injured an embroidered uniform guard. Following that, the black shadow rushed towards Lu Si. The sudden change was too fast. It was so fast that Lu Si only managed to grab the spring-embroidered saber at his waist with his right hand before his whole body flew backwards. His ears were filled with the whistling sound of the wind. Only when he hit the wall behind him did he stop. He felt as if all the bones in his body had fallen apart. With a plop, he fell to the ground. In just 2 rounds, the intruder had completely controlled the situation in the cellar. This result made everyone clap their hands in satisfaction. Then they lightly spat out 4 words, unable to withstand a single blow. The cellar door was once again opened from the outside. Wolf Fang Captain Tai, who brought Skinny Monkey and the others out. When he saw the situation in front of him, Skinny Monkey chuckled. Not bad. Violent Ape is indeed violent. You finished the battle so quickly. Oomph. It's just that these people are too incompetent. Violent Ape said unconcernedly. He looked as if he hadn't had enough fun yet. Alright, let's save them first. Then we'll capture these 2 people and bring them to the young master. Tai, who saw that the situation had been settled. The problem in the cellar had been solved. The Ghost Shadow Sniper team had taken action outside and killed all the other embroidered uniform guards. The danger no longer existed. He also let out a sigh of relief. After all, this time they were facing the elite embroidered uniform guards. Moreover, they had hostages in the hands of the other party. If they were careless, it could cause extremely serious consequences and disappoint the young master. Fortunately, the other party wasn't on guard. In addition, they were well prepared. With the help of the ghost sniper team, the problem was solved smoothly. At this time, Lu Si still had some strength in his body. He heard Tai Hu's voice in his ears. Immediately he shouted loudly, "I'm from the Imperial Court's embroidered uniform guards." "Who are you? Who allowed you to do this? Do you know that this is a crime that will lead to the confiscation of your family's property and the extermination of your family? You talk too much nonsense." Lu Si was still shouting. Skinny Monkey had already walked over impatiently. He lifted his foot and lightly kicked Lu Si. In an instant, Lu Si stopped moving. Obviously, this kick had knocked him out. The inner court of the magistrate's office. As the luxurious carriage drove in, it quickly began to clear the place. All unrelated people were kicked out. Even the bodyguards beside Guan Ying, Ma Wei, and Wei Guang were not left behind. Regarding this, the three naturally wanted to resist. However, when Qiu Vi led the first guard team to attack Peng Yu Ba Daojiang, and the other team members attacked together, how could those people be a match for them? They were either beaten to the ground or half kneeling on the ground with bloody noses and swollen faces. In short, there wasn't a single good person. Seeing that the strength of his subordinates was so weak, Guan Ying straightforwardly ordered everyone to leave. Since they couldn't win, it was better not to test the waters. It would be embarrassing. The inner court finally quieted down. Other than the three so-called Southern Ming officials and the first guard team, there was also the luxurious carriage that had been parked there without any movement. After calming down, Guan Ying decided to face everything that had happened. He cupped his fist and asked in a very respectful tone, "Is the Duke of Loyalty in the carriage?" "It's me." After a short pause, a voice finally came from the carriage. Then the curtain was pulled open by Tiger's Mane and Beta Persei, revealing Yang Qindong, who was wearing a green robe inside. Compared to the last time they met, Yang Qindong's face was pale, his eyes were dull, and his cheekbones seemed to be protruding a little. It was as if he had completely changed into a different person. He was much older. "Duke of Loyalty? What's going on? Why are you so sick?" Seeing Yang Qindong's appearance, Guan Ying was really shocked. He asked in disbelief. I was careless. I was poisoned a while ago. Fortunately, God blessed me. The mercenaries sent me a divine pill to detoxify the poison. That was how I managed to save my life." Yang Qindong's face was pale as he forced a smile. But what followed was a series of rapid coughs. It gave people the feeling that he had tuberculosis and would die from coughing at any time. Yang Qindong's appearance naturally shocked Guan Ying and Ma Wei. At first, they thought that he was looking for an excuse to not meet them because he was sick. But after a long time, they couldn't help but have all kinds of guesses. But in the end, they didn't expect his condition to be so serious. It looked as if he would die at any time. On the other hand, Wei Guang's expression didn't change. On the contrary, he was secretly delighted. What was going on? He probably had the clearest judgment in his heart. This time he came to Gaozhou Prefecture to see how Yang Qindong's condition was. He didn't expect that after not getting an answer for a long time, he would see hope when he thought there was no hope. Just by looking at it, the Duke of Loyalty was indeed seriously injured. It was the result of Su Moner's attack. But what Wei Guang didn't expect was that if she attacked, he should be dead. How could he still be alive? Could it be that it was like what was said just now, that it was a divine antidote sent by the mercenaries? If that was the case, how many good things did the mercenaries have that they didn't take out? While Wei Guang was still pondering over the crux of the matter, Yang Qindong had already opened his mouth once again. "Sirs, this time the mercenaries had no choice but to act. As you all know, the mercenaries are very protective of their people. Anyone who dares to provoke them will not have a good ending. Now that a person has gone missing and I heard that it's an officer, it's reasonable that they would be angry. How about this? I will be the middleman and give everyone a chance. If anyone is the one who captured him, stand up and ask for forgiveness now. I can even consider interceding for him. Maybe he can still live. This way everyone won't be affected. How about it?" As if he forced himself to say these words, Yang Qindong sat in the carriage and panted heavily. Tiger's Mane, who was waiting on him at the side, was anxious. Just a moment ago the young master was still talking and laughing with them. How long had it been? How could his illness be so serious? This didn't seem like an act. How could an act be so realistic? Chapter 422. In his anxiety, Tiger's Mane continued to say, Young master, your health is more important. You should speak less. Cough, young master, I don't want to come out sick, but the bigger picture is more important. I really don't want to see any conflict between the mercenary army and the great Ming dynasty. Yang Qindong struggled to say these words, and then he coughed heavily. Okay, young master, we understand. We understand. They also heard it. Tiger's Mane nodded repeatedly, then suddenly turned around and looked at Guanyin, Ma Wei and Wei Guang. He said, you all heard it clearly. The Duke said that whoever did it should stand up. Don't implicate others and don't hurt the relationship between the mercenary army and the great Ming dynasty. Tiger's Mane's words made Guanyin and the other two look at each other. At least Guanyin and Ma Wei didn't want to have any conflicts with the mercenary army, especially when the King of Min's faction was so rampant and crazily expanding. This elite army might be of great use. However, they really didn't know where the missing mercenary soldiers went. Duke of Loyalty and Courage, forgive me for speaking bluntly, but we really don't know where the mercenary soldiers went. How do you want us to hand them over? Is there a misunderstanding? Guanyin said in a weak tone. That's right. Is there some misunderstanding? Ma Wei chimed in with an innocent look. I think this must be a misunderstanding. You guys are just trying to frame someone. Duke of Loyalty and Courage, we respect your contributions to the Southern Ming dynasty, but you can't ignore us because of this. Let me tell you, this is disrespectful to the Southern Ming dynasty. Wei Guang opened his mouth and his tone was interrogative. His overbearing attitude was full of arrogance. Bang. Wei Guang, who was speaking, suddenly tilted his body, and then he half knelt on the ground. Then he clenched his teeth in pain and cold sweat poured down. A gunshot was fired. The one who fired the shot was naturally Yang Qindong. He didn't seem to like the noise, or maybe he was angry that the other party called him Duke of Loyalty and Courage instead of Duke of Loyalty and Courage. In short, he had fired the gun. When the gunshot rang out, Guanyin and Ma Wei were shocked. Then they saw that the one who was shot was Wei Guang, and a stream of dark red blood was flowing out from his trousers. Their faces immediately changed. Loyal Duke? What are you doing? Dare I ask, what did Wei Chan do to make you want to kill him? It was Ma Wei who asked. Then Guanyin also expressed his stance. Duke Zhongdan, no matter what it is, we can sit down and have a good talk. If you do this, I really can't explain it to the higher-ups. You've caused trouble. Guanyin and Ma Wei had such an attitude because of Wei Guang's noble status. They were members of the embroidered uniform guards, and even they had to be courteous to them. Secondly, he was also considered an official of the imperial court. If he attacked an official for no reason and did it in public, he would definitely be held accountable. Yang Qindong was no longer an imperial envoy. He no longer had the power to control the southern Ming officials at any time. Got into trouble? Yes, I did get into trouble, but it's not me, it's him. Yang Qindong's voice rang out again. Tiger's Mane, have they arrived? Bring them up. Yes, Tiger's Mane replied. He turned around and saw Qiu Vi lightly nodding. Good, bring them up. Yang Qindong's calmness and Tiger's Mane's unhurried manner fell into the eyes of Guanyin, Ma Wei, and the kneeling Wei Guang, causing them to have a look of confusion. Only Ma Wei's heart involuntarily skipped a beat. Then he shook his head forcefully. It was impossible. The place where Lu Jian was imprisoned was very hidden. It was impossible to find him so quickly. Besides, he had already instructed Lu Si to silence him if things went wrong. What was there to be afraid of? It must be something else. Yes, it must be. Comforting himself, Wei Guang's expression became much calmer. When he raised his head again, he had already recovered his initial calmness. However, all of this calmness instantly crumbled when he saw the people being escorted in. Lu Si, who was wearing a turquoise brocade robe, was escorted out. At the same time, a few brocade guard brothers who had stayed behind to guard the courtyard were also escorted out. Wei Guang could even name these people. As soon as they appeared, he felt as if his head had been blown off. The person who was brought over was indeed Lu Si. Originally, his head had been lowered, thinking that he was definitely going to die. However, when he raised his head and saw Wei Guang, who was wearing a large red python robe, a flying fish robe, a black gauze hat, a belt around his waist and an embroidered spring saber at his waist, his originally dim and lifeless eyes instantly lit up. Boss, save me, save me. They saved Lu Jian and killed a few of our brothers. Lu Si's shouts continued, but at this time, everyone's gaze naturally fell on Wei Guang. Even Guanyin and Ma Wei, who did not know what had happened before, understood at this moment what had happened. They also finally knew that someone had kidnapped the mercenary soldiers, and the mastermind behind this was Wei Guang. The soldiers were kidnapped. No wonder the mercenaries were so angry and mobilized so many people. At this moment, Guan Ying and Ma Wei seemed to understand the mercenaries' actions. However, their understanding was one thing, and they would definitely not express any opinions on this matter. The brocade guard was one of the most trusted subordinates of the emperor. How could others meddle with it? Even if they did something wrong, there would definitely be someone from above to vouch for them. It was not something that military officials of their level could interfere. Since they could not interfere, they could only stand aside and watch the show. From a certain point of view, Guan Ying and Ma Wei were even happy to see Wei Guang suffer. Shut up. Hearing that Lu Ci's shouts had no intention of stopping, Wei Guang endured the gunshot wound on his leg and yelled loudly. Then he looked at Yang Qindong in the luxurious carriage and said with a strong appearance, "That's right, we captured him. It was only because he violated the laws of the Ming dynasty that we had to capture him. But you guys, why did you dare to kill the brothers of the brocade guard? Do you know how big of a crime this is?" Bang. Just as Wei Guang wanted to gain the upper hand by a show of strength and wanted to question Yang Qindong, another gunshot rang out. The unprepared Wei Guang's left leg was also shot. He was originally half kneeling, but now he was completely kneeling on both knees and became shorter. How bold, capturing a mercenary soldier for no reason and still daring to argue with reason. You really deserve to be killed. Yang Qindong's face turned ashen. Perhaps it was because his body was too weak or because he was really angry, but his face gave people a terrifying feeling. When Yang Qindong said that he deserved to be killed, Tiger's Mane nodded his head and nodded towards Ba Daojiang and Peng Yu of the first guard team. The two of them strode to the kneeling Wei Guang and lifted him into the air with one arm each. "What are you doing? What are you doing?" "I am the commander of the brocade guard, Qian Shi. I was personally appointed by the emperor. I am an official of the imperial court. You have no right to do anything to me, no." As if he felt something, Wei Guang struggled and shouted loudly, explaining the severity of the situation. "Deal with them one by one from small to large." Cough. Yang Qindong didn't pay attention to the shouting Wei Guang, but after saying this to Hu Mang, he leaned back, gasping, and his chest was constantly undulating at this moment. "Young master, you need to take care of your body." Hu Mang blurted out this sentence unconsciously. It seemed that Yang Qindong's acting was too good, and he was speaking from his own feelings. However, Guan Ying and Ma Wei, who were about to plead for leniency, shut their mouths when they heard this. Yang Qindong was sick like this. Logically speaking, he should be recuperating, but he still walked out. This showed how important this matter was. Wei Guang brought this upon himself. If they pleaded now, it would seem that this matter had something to do with them. But who knew if the angry Yang Qindong would take care of them as well? Since it was none of his business, he could just let it go. If there were any benefits to be gained from telling him, he could still take the risk and give it a try. But the people of the embroidered uniform guards had always been ungrateful. Even if they spoke up for him now, when they committed a crime in the future, they would not be lenient. If that was the case, why take the risk? No one spoke up for Wei Guang and the others. Tiger's Mane was naturally more straightforward when it came to doing things. First, he and Beta Persei each took a machete. Then, they came in front of the ordinary embroidered uniform guards who were brought here. With a raise of their right arm, their heads were separated from their bodies. Tiger's Mane and Beta Persei took turns to kill the other embroidered uniform guards. When it was Beta Persei's turn to raise his machete to kill Lu Ci, he actually wet his pants. Then he shouted loudly, "Don't kill me, I know who poisoned the Duke of Loyalty." Beta Persei, who had already raised his machete and was about to swing it down, suddenly stopped. It was as if he had been immobilized. "Lu Ci, do you not want to live anymore? Aren't you afraid that all 9 generations of your family will be executed?" Wei Guang, who was still emphasizing his identity to intimidate others not to touch him, suddenly heard Lu Ci's words. His expression changed drastically and cold sweat flowed down his face. As a trusted aide, Lu Ci had heard Wei Guang mention when he was drunk about the plan of the commander sending Su Munaer to kill Yang Qindong. After he sobered up, Wei Guang even thought of silencing him. But at that time, Lu Ci knelt on the ground and swore that he would never speak of this matter. Otherwise he would die a horrible death. In the end, Wei Guang spared his subordinate's life. Perhaps he also thought that Lu Ci would not dare to speak of such an important matter because once it was spread, he would definitely die. Chapter 423. But who would have thought that he would finally say it in front of so many people? The consequences would be unimaginable. Wei Guang still wanted to say something to scare him, but Peng Yu and Ba Daojiang, who were sandwiching him, received a signal from Tiger's mane and each of them punched him in the stomach. The intense pain made him shut his mouth immediately and groan in pain. Wei Guang did not speak, but Lu Si stood there and laughed loudly. Execute my entire family? I'm sorry, but my ancestral home is Yunnan's Cheli department. When the Min king rebelled, everyone in my family was killed. No one was spared, so I'm the only one left. What's there to be afraid of? Lu Si seemed to be venting something. After shouting, he suddenly turned to look at the side of the carriage and fell to his knees. This lowly one is Lu Si, serving in the brocade guard. I have done many heinous things. I know that I have sinned deeply. However, the heavens are virtuous. I want to turn over a new leaf and start anew. I hope that the Duke of Loyalty can give this lowly one a chance. The heavens are indeed benevolent. Tell me everything you know. As long as it's true, I'll let you live. I'll even give you enough money to live the rest of your life. But remember, don't try to bite me. Otherwise, don't blame my gun for not recognizing you. Cough cough. Yang Qindong's voice slowly came out. Then the carriage turned around and faced the direction where Lu Si knelt on the ground. As the carriage turned around, he gave a signal to Tiger's mane. Thank you, Duke of Loyalty, for your understanding. Lu Si said with a slightly emotional tone. He believed that since the Duke of Loyalty had made a promise in front of so many people, his life should be saved. With the thought of surviving a calamity, he raised his head and said loudly, Loyal Duke, the people who wanted to take your life were the embroidered uniform guards. They were afraid that your contributions were too great and would endanger the Emperor. Pucci. Lu Si seemed to want to continue speaking, but a steel saber had already pierced through his back. The tip of the saber continued to drip blood after piercing through his chest. Lu Si used the last of his strength to look sideways. When he saw that the person who killed him was actually his superior, Wei Guang, there was a strong unwillingness in his eyes. After smacking his lips twice, he leaned back heavily with his eyes staring at the sky. He couldn't be more dead than he already was. The person who killed Lu Si was Wei Guang. Just now, for some reason, Peng Yu and Ba Daojiang, who were originally holding him down, suddenly loosened their grip, giving him a chance to catch his breath. Then he heard Lu Si's voice. How could Wei Guang listen to him when he was telling the truth? Lu Si no longer had any relatives. Naturally, he was not afraid of being executed. However, his family members were all in Nanjing. If something really happened to them and he died, what about his family members? For his family, Wei Guang, who forced himself to take a breath, suddenly flew up and used the last trace of internal qi in his body to stab Lu Si, who was telling the truth, through his heart. Lu Si was finally dead. Although before he died he said that it was the genie guards who killed Yang Qindong. Fortunately, he didn't say the real mastermind behind the scenes. Everything was delayed. Wei Guang let out a long sigh of relief in his heart. When he raised his head to look at Yang Qindong, his voice was fierce and resolute as he said, That's right, I did it. I arranged for someone to poison you. I just didn't expect your life to be so tough that you still didn't die. But it doesn't matter. It seems that you only have half of your life left. Haha, you will spend the rest of your life in pain. In this way my goal has been achieved. I have achieved it. After saying this, Wei Guang, who was laughing, suddenly put the spring embroidery saber across his neck, as if he was going to die. Hurry up and take the saber. Yang Qindong shouted anxiously. But in the end it was still too late. Without waiting for the others to do anything, the saber had already slit its owner's neck. Then blood splattered. Wei Guang fell to the ground with a plop, without a trace of life or breath. Wei Guang had committed suicide. This scene made Guan Ying and Ma Wei's hearts jump. The change in front of their eyes was so fast that it was completely out of their expectations. However, they quickly calmed down and thought through everything. For Guan Ying, he even had a draft in his mind on how he was going to report today's matter to the court. It was nothing more than Wei Guang, who was jealous of the Duke of Loyalty's contributions, sending people to poison him. Then, seeing that he didn't die, he sent people to capture the mercenary soldiers, wanting to know how deeply the Duke of Loyalty had been poisoned. However, everything was discovered by the Duke of Loyalty. Then he committed suicide in front of everyone. Regardless of what Guan Ying and Ma Wei thought, after seeing Wei Guang commit suicide, the resentment in Yang Qindong's heart could be considered to have been vented a little. Su Maner had already said that the person who arranged for her to come to Yang Qindong's side and asked her to wait for an opportunity to make a move. The person who sent the poison bun was the commander of the embroidered uniform guards, Menda. This time Wei Guang came to the sect to clarify this matter. The embroidered uniform guards were the emperor's personal guards. Only the emperor had the authority to kill the people there. Otherwise, no matter how heinous the crime was, it wasn't something that others could casually touch. It was the same for Yang Qindong. Although he already had a certain level of strength and could be said to be above many other officials, if he killed Wei Guang, it would be equivalent to giving Zhu Qizhen a big slap in the face. Yang Qindong wasn't willing to do such a thankless thing unless it was absolutely necessary. As such, Wei Guang committing suicide was naturally the best outcome. As for why he was able to break free from Peng Yu and Ba Daozhang's restraints and kill Lu Si with his crippled legs, it was naturally the result after Yang Qindong gave Tiger's Mane a hint with his eyes. In these few years, the tacit understanding between the two was still very strong. Yang Qindong didn't need Lu Si to tell the truth because he already knew the truth. On the other hand, if the truth was revealed, would he seek revenge on Menda? If he did, would Zhu Qizhen have any thoughts and allow such a thing to happen? As such, this was the current scene. Wei Guang killed Lu Si and then committed suicide. Yang Qindong could remove himself from this matter completely and also take the opportunity to knock Menda and Zhu Qizhen down, letting them know how difficult it was to kill him. This time they were lucky to pass, but they might not be so lucky next time. Since his goal had been achieved, Yang Qindong naturally didn't need to stay here. Waving his hand, Tiger's Mane and Beta Persei put down the curtains of the carriage, and then the large group of people left the magistrate court in Gaozhou Prefecture. Along the way, neither Guanyin nor Ma Wei stood out to say anything. Yang Qindong was indeed sick and it was quite serious. This was all seen with their own eyes. Not to mention, this illness was poisoned by the brocade guards. As such, how could they still ask Yang Qindong to leave with the mercenaries? Not to mention, now that the king of Min was powerful, they still pointed at Yang Qindong in their hearts as a shield. They believed that with the existence of these mercenaries, even if the king of Min wanted to conquer Gaozhou and Laizhou, he would have to consider the strength of these mercenaries first. They successfully returned to their own military camp. Yang Qindong was completely different from before. His illness had long disappeared, and when he appeared in front of everyone, he was full of energy. "How is Lu Jian?" Yang Qindong asked Tiger's Mane as he walked towards the infirmary. "Young master, Lu Jian only suffered some superficial injuries. He will be fine after a good rest." Oh yes, he didn't say anything when he was tortured by the brocade guards. He is really a tough man. Tiger's Mane said with a face full of admiration. "Not bad, no wonder he can become the platoon leader of the auxiliary troops. Tell him that after he recovers, let him report to the Cold Front Regiment. He has already passed the loyalty test." Yang Qindong nodded satisfactorily, then opened the tent of the infirmary. He saw Lu Jian, who had already fainted, but his facial features still gave off a sense of determination. Looking at Lu Jian, who was almost covered in wounds, Yang Qindong sighed and said, "Look, this is our warrior. How brave and tenacious. This is a true man. Tell all the Cold Front Regiment and auxiliary troops to learn from Lu Jian. Also, give Lu Jian a silver medal. This is the reward he deserves." Hearing about the silver medal, Tiger's Mane nodded heavily. "That is indeed the case. I will pass down the young master's order immediately." At this moment, Lu Jian was still in a coma. However, if he woke up and heard these words, he would definitely be extremely excited. One must know that the military medal not only represented personal glory, but it could also be converted into cash when faced with difficulties. This was set by Yang Qindong before he announced the medal system. This was because he was afraid that the country's heroes would face difficulties one day. If that really happened, a high-grade medal could be exchanged for a large amount of silver, enough to solve most problems and difficulties. 1451 AD, late July. After more than 10 days of bumpy travel, Kuang Yi, the southern Ming crown prince and minister of war, finally arrived at Gaozhou prefecture of Guangdong. The reason why it was a few turns was because some of the cities from Nanjing to here were already occupied by the king of Min. He had to change his route several times along the way. Kuang Ye's entry into Gaozhou prefecture was a secret. Even his journey was very secretive. No one knew if the king of Min had placed any spies in southern Ming. If the route was made public, who knew how many times he would have to face assassination? It was even uncertain if he could safely reach Gaozhou prefecture. Because it was hidden, when Kuang Yi suddenly appeared in Gaozhou prefecture, it really shocked Guanyin and Ma Wei. Chapter 424. The journey was too long and the journey was not peaceful. The news that Kuang Yi had regained his power and was promoted half a rank hadn't reached here yet. So when he saw Kuang Yi appear, Guanying's face was full of shock. His first feeling was that his teacher had been kicked out of the capital by Ying Zong. "Greetings, Lord Kuang." Ma Wei also broke out in a cold sweat. He also didn't know what had happened to this old minister recently. However, since he was here, he still had to be respectful. After leaving here, he would immediately send someone to the capital to find out more about Kuang Yi. Kuang Yi's eyes fell on the two's expressions. This old man who was over 60 years old was extremely wise and far-sighted. With a single glance, he saw through the two's thoughts. Chuckling, he said, "Generals, there is no need to be surprised. This old man came to Gaozhou Prefecture under the Emperor's orders. All right. The Emperor empathized with my loyalty and bravery and specially conferred me the title of Grand Tutor to the Crown Prince." Guanyin Ma became excited when he heard the Crown Prince's words. He clasped his hands and said, "Congratulations, teacher." "Congratulations, Lord Kuang." Ma Wei also quickly changed the way he addressed Kuang Yi. He no longer called him Lord Kuang like before but Minister Kuang. "Congratulations to you too." Kuang Yi's wrinkled face smiled. He had seen Ma Wei's performance just now. His attitude towards these people was only perfunctory. Firstly, this was not a direct descendant that he had nurtured, and secondly, the other party was the commander of the Guangdong Guards, a martial official of the 3 ranks. If he was too close to the other party, once this news reached the court and reached the emperor's ears, who knew what kind of adverse effects it would bring? Maintaining a certain distance and only maintaining the relationship of a superior and subordinate was how an evergreen official should behave. "Teacher, something happened a few days ago. I have secretly reported it to the imperial court, but I don't think you know about it." After the pleasantries, Guanyin said carefully, "What is it?" Kuang Yi had a bad feeling when he heard that Guanyin had secretly reported it to the imperial court. He knew that ordinary small matters couldn't be reported, especially when the situation was so unstable. Trivial matters couldn't be reported. He also understood Guanyin's character. Guanyin was far-sighted and would not be entangled over such a small matter. Now that Guanyin had brought it up in such a serious manner, it could not be anything good. "Teacher, Wei Guang of the Imperial Court's Brocade Guard has died. He committed suicide in front of us." The reason for his death was. Although he didn't know why Kuang Yi was here, given the current situation, if the Minister of War didn't stay in the capital to organize and command the army, but instead came to Gaozhou, a place that seemed like it was about to be abandoned, something big must have happened. Based on his analysis and intuition, Guanyin believed that it had something to do with Yang Qindong and the mercenaries. Therefore he first told him about Yang Qindong being poisoned. Guanyin was indeed capable. At the very least he had good foresight. After he finished speaking, he saw the shock on Kuang Yi's face. "Wait, what did you say? Was the Duke of Loyalty poisoned?" Wei Guang even admitted that he did it? "Well, Minister, you must be tired from traveling so far. I will go arrange for a banquet." When Ma Wei heard this, his expression changed again and again. He felt that the teacher and disciple had something important to talk about. It was really awkward for him to stand there with his status, so he found an excuse to leave. Kuang Yi was very satisfied with Ma Wei's tactfulness. However, his thoughts were more on Yang Qindong. "Guanyin, how is the Duke of Loyalty?" "Not too good. I took a look at him that day. His complexion was not good and his body was very weak," Guanyin answered honestly. What should we do?" Hearing that Yang Qindong's body was in such a bad state, Kuang Yi's expression was full of hatred. He had seen Yang Qindong countless times. This kind of young man seemed to always have an inexhaustible amount of energy. Even a small illness would not affect his body. However, from Guanyin's description, he seemed to be like a lamp that had run out of oil. One could imagine how severe the poison was. Thinking that the southern Ming Empire's hopes were mostly placed on Yang Qindong, if something really happened to him, there would be no link between the southern Ming Empire and the mercenary army. For the current situation, it was definitely not a good thing. He said angrily, "What do the imperial bodyguards want to do? Get rid of the donkey after it has outlived its usefulness?" Wei Guang alone would not have such ability and courage. There must be someone behind him. However, they did not think about it. If something really happened to Yang Qindong, who would be able to quell the Min King's rebellion? The person behind this is really... At this point, Kuang Yi stopped talking because he suddenly thought of the person behind the Imperial Secret Service. For a big matter like dealing with Yang Qindong, without that person's permission, normal people would not have the guts to act on their own. Could it be that this was really his intention? Once the thought appeared in his mind, it could not be dismissed. Thinking about it carefully, that person did have a reason to act. Yang Qindong was ultimately too young and so capable. The existence of such a person was originally a huge threat and pressure. The emperor was still young, but once he grew old and that person was still alive, Would his descendants be able to suppress Yang Qindong? If they could not, what would happen? What Yang Qindong lacked now was experience and enough merit. However, he was still young. Once he was given enough power, these could be made up for. Once he had everything he needed, it would be even more difficult to control him. This led to the poisoning incident after the Huang bandit army incident was over. It seemed to make more sense. There was another problem. If it was really his intention, why did he not tell him when he received the order to come this time? Even if it was just a hint, it would be good, right? He would not let him be in such a passive position, right? It wasn't impossible to think of other ways to solve this problem. Now that he had come to Gaozhou Prefecture and was seen by so many people, it would not be long before Yang Qindong received the news. When that time came, what should he do? If he did not meet the other party, how should he talk? The emperor was afraid of him and wanted to poison him. Would he still dare to put such a person in an important position? For a moment, countless questions rose in Kuang Ye's mind, causing him to feel a headache. He originally thought that after coming to Gaozhou Prefecture and seeing Yang Qindong and promising him many benefits, he would have a chance to persuade this person to help him. But now, it seemed that everything was going to be overturned. He also felt helpless. Teacher, teacher. Seeing that Kuang Yi seemed to be in a daze, Guanyin carefully called out to him. Ichim? What's wrong? Kuang Yi regained his senses and asked Guanyin. Teacher. You must have an important mission for coming here this time, but I wonder what the mission is? If you want to put the Duke of Loyalty in an important position, shouldn't you reconsider? Guanyin did not go into too much detail. But to smart people there was no need to be so thorough. Many times it was best to stop at a certain point. That's right. Kuang Yi nodded, then said, Come, bring me a brush and ink. This official wants to explain everything that happened here to the emperor, then send someone to send it out at the fastest speed possible. The news of Kuang Ye's arrival in Gaozhou Prefecture was immediately reported by the city's security bureau to the mercenary camp 5 li outside the city. Tiger's Mane excitedly brought the news to the military tent. When he saw Yang Qindong, he excitedly said, Young Master, Minister Kuang Yi is here. Aha, as you expected, we will be of great use. He's finally here? After hearing this, Yang Qindong's expression was calm as if everything was within his expectations. But then he shook his head. Things have changed. Wei Guang's death and the words that Lu Si said before he died, even if we don't care, I'm afraid that others will. Sai, it seems that if we want the plan to go smoothly, we have to continue pretending to be sick. Continue pretending to be sick? What? Tiger's Mane asked with a puzzled expression. Tiger's Mane, young master, let me ask you. In your heart, are you afraid of a lively enemy or a sick enemy who could die at any time? Hearing Yang Qindong's question, Tiger's Mane was puzzled, but he still answered instinctively, of course it's a lively enemy. But what does this have to do with us? Tiger's Mane, who had just finished speaking, immediately shut his mouth. Obviously he had thought of something. Seeing Tiger's Mane's enlightened expression, Yang Qindong laughed and said, Okay, you're not too stupid. Okay, go and inform the brothers in the 1st and 2nd guards. Tell them that once Kuang Yi comes, tell them to act more angry and sad. As for what to do, go and teach them. I saw that your performance last time was very good. Hearing this new mission, Tiger's Mane said with a bitter face, Young master, it's not that my performance was good, but your acting last time was too good, so much so that I believed it was true. Alright then, let's do as you say. Yang Qindong laughed loudly. He casually sent Tiger's Mane away, then picked up the pen and continued to write a letter home. The letter was written to Su Maner, who had already been sent to Crimson City. The two of them had only been together for a short while, but because of some things they had no choice but to separate. They were like newlyweds, it was impossible to say that they did not miss each other. Of course, writing a letter to Su Maner was not a privilege that only she enjoyed. For example, 2nd Madame Qiao Yin and 4th Madame Lady Xiang, who were in the Yang family manor in the capital, would also communicate with Yang Qindong from time to time. Even Wan Xiaoyu, who had always been in Crimson City, would also communicate with Yang Qindong from time to time. But this time when he wrote to Su Maner, Yang Qindong did not say any words of love. Instead, he told her in detail about how he had pretended to be poisoned. He also said that he had arranged for people to keep an eye on the capital and Nanjing of the southern Ming dynasty. He wanted to see if there was anyone who could redress the Su family's reputation. If there was, then it was worth it for him to pretend to be sick. On the other hand, it would mean that the other party did not keep their promises. Since that was the case, he would have to seek justice himself. Chapter 425. Early the next morning, an unexpected guest arrived at the mercenaries' camp. Guan Ying and Ma Wei were standing behind the old man. As soon as they appeared, the gate of the mercenary camp was opened. Commander Luo came to greet them in person. "Greetings, Minister Kuang." Tiger's Mane stepped forward and saluted. "My young master knew that you would come, so he asked me to wait here to greet you. Please come with me." "Okay." Kuang Yi nodded and then said to Guan Ying and Ma Wei behind him, "You two stay here. When you have time you can learn how to lead troops from Commander Luo. I'm going to visit Duke Zhongdan." "Teacher this." Guan Ying seemed to be worried and wanted to say something, but Kuang Yi waved his hand and then followed Tiger's Mane to the depths of the camp. In the largest tent, Yang Qindong had finished his makeup, which made Hu Yen and Madame Shui exclaim in surprise. "Lu Lang, your skill is so powerful. It really looks like you have suffered a serious internal injury." Hu Yen looked amazed and her hand couldn't help but touch Yang Qindong's face. Yang Qindong quickly dodged to the left and right to avoid her touch. Yang Qindong had practiced the art of makeup a lot in his previous life. Sometimes, in order to complete a task, he had to disguise himself as various people. Not only did he have to look good, but he also had to learn how to disguise himself. Otherwise, how could he fool others? "Yes, my husband looks so haggard now. If I didn't know the truth, I would believe it." Madame Shui also stared at Yang Qindong's face, trying to find a flaw. However, no matter how hard she looked, she couldn't find the problem. It seemed that Yang Qindong was really sick. No matter how thick-skinned he was, Yang Qindong felt a little embarrassed when the two women stared at him like this. He changed the topic and said, "Your husband is well prepared. It will depend on your performance later. You always talk about how good you are at acting. This time it's time to test you. Don't screw up." "What do you mean by screw up?" Hu Yen asked with interest. "It means don't screw up," Yang Qindong explained awkwardly. "Oh, then we won't let you down," Hu Yen and Madame Shui said in unison. They understood what Madame Shui said. At this moment, Beta Persei rushed in. "Young Master, Tiger's Head and Minister Qi are here." "Oh." As soon as he said this, there was a sad cry. Who else could it be but Hu Yen and Madame Shui? The show began. After a smile appeared on Yang Qindong's mouth, his body also lay down on the bed. It seemed that even breathing was very laborious. Yang Air stared at the scene in front of him with his mouth agape. He thought to himself, as expected, birds of a feather flock together. Look, this family is full of acting experts. I still have to learn from them. But I don't know if I can learn a thing or two from them in this life. Outside the tent, Hu Mang finally led Kuang Yi into the tent, and what he saw was this very sad scene. There were cries and sighs, and there was even blood in the spittoon beside the bed. It seemed that Yang Qindong had just vomited blood not long ago. "A loyal and courageous Duke, how did you become like this?" Even though he was mentally prepared, he had heard Guan Ying explain Yang Qindong's condition in detail yesterday. But this morning he still came to take a look because he was worried. Originally he came with doubts, but the moment he entered the tent, the situation changed completely. He even felt sad for some reason. He could not help but think that some people were too much. This was a hero of the southern Ming Empire. How could they treat him like this? Beta Persei lowered his head and said nothing. He moved a chair to the side of the bed as if to let Kuang Yi sit down. But the sound of the chair slamming on the ground showed his attitude towards Kuang Yi. He was extremely unwelcome. "Beta Persei, don't be rude." Yang Qindong, who was on the bed, opened his eyes with great effort and scolded softly. Then he forced a smile and said to Kuang Yi, "Minister Qi is here. Hurry, take a seat. You can leave too." Cough, cough, cough. With the help of Hu Yen and Lady Shui, Yang Qindong got up with great effort and sat down with his back against a large futon. Then Hu Yen and the others tactfully left. Beta Persei did not want to leave, but Yang Qindong said, "You can leave. Minister Qi is a good person. He won't harm me." Beta Persei reluctantly left the tent. Kuang Ye's face turned red when he heard that he wouldn't harm him. Of course he knew what Yang Qindong meant. Kuang Yi felt sad when he thought about how the originally handsome and lively young man had been plotted against and ended up like this. He thought about how he had been wronged when he was ordered to stay at home to recuperate. The words, "Heaven's might is unpredictable," involuntarily entered Kuang Ye's heart. Although he felt indignant in Kuang Ye's heart, the emperor was the emperor. He could not let anyone question him, not even himself. After suppressing the complicated emotions in his heart, he looked at Yang Qindong with a face full of concern. "Duke Zhongdan, regarding the matter of Wei Guang's poisoning, I have already written an urgent letter to the capital. I will definitely give you an explanation. Forget it. He's already dead. Besides, Minister Kuang, do you really think he has the guts to do all this? Yang Qindong's question hit the nail on the head, leaving Kuang Yi speechless. If he said no, it would be the same as criticizing the emperor. If he said yes, it would be an insult to his and Yang Qindong's intelligence. This was a question that couldn't be answered and couldn't be answered. Kuang Yi sighed and did not dwell on this question. Instead, he spoke in a comforting tone for Yang Qindong. Duke Zhongdan, you have been wronged recently. I also heard that some people are still calling you Duke of Loyalty and Courage. I was angry about this and gave the order. Although your title of Duke of Loyalty and Courage was given by King Yu, since we have recognized him as the Dai Zong, his title is naturally reasonable. If anyone dares to call him that in the future, you can punish them. Kuang Yi was trying to comfort Yang Qindong by saying that he was on Yang Qindong's side. However, he was only on Yang Qindong's side psychologically. Many people would often say, "You are a good person and I support you spiritually." However, Yang Qindong did not need such a good person card. Politics was not a game. It was not a matter of good for you, good for me, good for everyone. In order to achieve their own ideals, those who opposed could become mortal enemies. It was common to even fight with swords. Just because you're a good person, how can you lower your head and accept everything when you've been wronged? Therefore, after listening to Kuang Ye's words, Yang Qindong quickly counterattacked. Sai, it's just a title of duke. It's not like Prince Shiping was given the title of prince. There's no need to be so calculative. A cold breath came from the bottom of his heart and went straight to his head. Kuang Yi widened his eyes and looked at Yang Qindong in disbelief. There was hesitation and doubt in his eyes, but more than that, there was fear and horror. This young man actually wanted the title of prince and envied Prince Mubin of Shiping. However, did he not know that since the establishment of the Great Ming dynasty, Mubin was the only prince with a different surname who was still alive? There was only one prince after so many years. Yang Qindong actually wanted to be one of them. His courage and desire were beyond the reach of ordinary people. It was no wonder that the emperor was wary of him. For such an ambitious person, even if Kuang Yi was in the emperor's position, he would also be wary of him. He might even do something regardless of the consequences. Kuang Yi was stunned. In Yang Qindong's eyes, he forced a smile on his pale face. Minister Kuang, it's just a joke. You don't believe it, do you? Haha, how could that be? This old man was just amazed by the courage of the Duke of Loyalty and Courage. Kuang Yi chuckled perfunctorily. However, in his heart he thought, who would believe that you are joking? How can some things be taken as a joke? In just a few words, Yang Qindong had already stated his expectations. This also made Kuang Yi realize that after using him last time, he threw him to the side and even sent someone to poison him. He was afraid that he had already hurt his feelings. If he wanted to use him to send troops, he would have to pay a heavy price. The position of prince was one of the requirements. Even though he had expected Yang Qindong to demand an exorbitant price when he invited him again, he did not expect such an outrageous request. At this moment, even Kuang Yi wanted to retreat. Today's trip was to see the condition of Yang Qindong's body. If possible, he wanted to test whether he could continue to lead the mercenaries to work for the Great Ming dynasty. He originally thought that it would be difficult to achieve the second requirement. After all, it was a bit comical to talk about sending troops in front of a sick person. However, Yang Qindong's initiative allowed these two requirements to be met. It was just that the results were not very satisfactory. As if he knew that Kuang Ye's probing had achieved its goal, or perhaps Yang Qindong's body was really not good and he had reached his body's limit for receiving guests for so long. At this moment he began to cough again and could not stop. This caused Hu Yen and the others who were waiting outside the tent to quickly rush in. Chapter 426. As soon as these people came in, Kuang Yi knew that he had to leave. He wanted to see if there were any other ways to solve the problem. But when he saw Yang Qindong's attitude and his current physical condition, he knew that it was meaningless to say anything more. Kuang Yi left. Just like when he came, Tiger's Mane sent him out of the barracks. Yang Qindong stopped coughing, shook his head and said, "It's hard work to pretend to be sick. I hope I can fool this old guy." His words made both Hu Yen and Madame Shui laugh. This was their husband. When he was serious he was a little scary, but sometimes he was very cute. Yang Qindong did this to deceive Kuang Yi, and he also took the opportunity to put forward his request. In fact, Kuang Yi was indeed deceived. Yang Qindong's makeup skills were too good, or it could be said that the things in the warehouse were too good, so good that they could not be found in this era. That was why he could deceive everyone. "Teacher, how is Duke Zhongdan's condition?" On the way back to the city, Guaning asked in a low voice. When he saw Kuang Ye's gloomy face after leaving the barracks, he felt a little nervous. After all, a while ago he was not respectful to Yang Qindong, and even wanted to trick him. What he did was likely to ruin his teacher's plan, and he was a little worried about it. "He's really sick," Kuang Yi answered in a low voice, and the image of Yang Qindong's terminally ill flashed in his mind. "Then, I wonder if I can still lead troops into battle?" Guaning continued to ask in a low voice. This was the main point he was concerned about. He had already received the news that King of Min's faction had begun to deploy troops and generals while stabilizing the current results. They were preparing to expand the results of the war. As one of the occupied areas, Guangdong was obviously intolerable. That was to say, even if they did not take the initiative to attack, it would not be long before King Min took the initiative to deal with them. Lead the army to fight? Kuang Yi shook his head. Who knows? However, if you want him to fight, you have to agree to one of his conditions. You have to become a king like Shiping Wang Mu Bin. Kuang Yi whispered when he saw that no one else was around. What? Crown king? Guaning almost couldn't hold himself back and yelled out. However, he quickly shut his mouth. From his expression, it could be seen that he was frightened as well. Who was Mu Bin? He was the descendant of the Mu family, and had been loyal for generations. He was forced to be a king because he was going to pacify Yunnan this time. However, from the looks of it now, it did not seem to be of much use. This was because the commander-in-chief knew that the failure of Dong Xing, this stupid teammate, had prevented him from unleashing his full strength. But in any case, Mu Bin, who was crowned as a king, was like a nail nailed to the back of King of Min, so that they could not attack Nanjing with all their strength. From this point of view, the crowning as a king had some effect. Who was Yang Qindong? Although he was also the descendant of the Yang family, and was also a loyal family, he just saved the leader of the mercenaries by coincidence. He did not have any real power in his hands, so why should he be a king? Of course, it was a bit too much to say why. After all, Yang Qindong saved Ingzong's life, and defeated the Wala's invasion on behalf of Ingzong. Now, he had the merit of pacifying the chaos in Guangdong, which was also a great achievement. But because of this, he could not be a king casually. Everything was because he was too powerful. He was so powerful that it was a little scary. Unlike Mu Bin, whose influence was only in Yunnan, he was nothing outside of Yunnan. Because of Yang Qindong's power, once he was crowned as a king, it was hard to predict what the consequences would be. Thinking of this, Guaning did not dare to say anything. And these were also seen by Kuang Yi. He could not help but sigh in his heart. There were some people in the great Ming dynasty who were crowned as kings, such as Zhongshan Prince Suda, Kaiping Prince Chang Yuchen, Chiang Prince Li Wenzhong, Ningyi Prince Deng Yu, Dongou Prince Tang He, Chening Prince Mu Ying, and now Shiping Prince Mu Bin. But except for the last one, the others were all crowned as kings after they died. Yang Qindong was a living person. When he thought of living people, he could not help but think of Yang Qindong's weak body. Kuang Yi thought in his heart that perhaps this person would not live for long. In this case, crowning him as a king did not seem to be an unrealistic idea. Kuang Ye's heart became hesitant at first. When he was sure that Yang Qindong was seriously ill, the idea of crowning him as a king was born. Of course, he also knew that such a big matter could not be decided by himself. He still needed to ask the emperor for instructions. And so, after sending out the urgent letter yesterday, another urgent letter was sent out after he returned to the study of the Gaozhou government. Ping in Beijing, Japan. The imperial city of Japan was also called the Imperial Palace of the Great Inner City. It represented the highest power in Japan, and was also the political, cultural, and economic center of the country. As the 102nd Emperor of Japan, Yanren was known as the Emperor of the Garden. This kind of name was very common in Japan. The people here were also very used to naming people after places such as the foot of the mountain, the mouth of the river, the bridge, and so on. The Emperor of Japan was originally the most noble existence in this country. In fact, this was indeed the case to the outside world. Many orders were issued by the Emperor of the Garden and known to the people. But in reality, Yanren was more of a puppet-like existence. At least in some matters, he had to look at other people's faces and listen to other people's opinions before he could make the final decision. As a descendant of the royal family, Yanren naturally did not want to disgrace the name of the emperor. In private, he had been working hard to change the situation. This was why he sent his favorite daughter, Princess Junko, to the Great Ming Dynasty. At that time, the Great Ming Dynasty was very powerful to the outside world. At least, it was far from what Japan could compare to. They still had to look up to this big country in the east. After Princess Junko was sent out, some information came back through various channels. But most of it was about the princess's experience in the northern capital of the great Ming dynasty. The most mentioned person was a young man called Yang Qindong. The letter said that Yang Qindong was only in his early 20s, but he had already been conferred the title of duke and had a lot of influence in the great Ming dynasty. Regarding the records in this letter, Yan Ren naturally had a feeling of dislike towards Yang Qindong. It was not because of anything else. In his eyes, if such a person continued to develop, he would often become a powerful minister, just like General Ashikaga Yoshimasa. It was just that no matter whether Yan Ren liked Yang Qindong or not, when Shaolin suddenly came to the palace and brought back an important news, the emperor was finally shaken and had a better understanding of the name Yang Qindong. In a secret room deep in the palace, this place was not known to outsiders. Those who could come here were all very important people trusted by the emperor. Shaolin was able to appear here because of a piece of news he brought back, as well as the handwritten letter he took out from Princess Junko. When Junko left Japan, she and her father had agreed on some of the secret words in the letter. In other words, on the surface there was nothing wrong with some of the letters. But only the father and daughter could see the authenticity of the letter and whether it was written under coercion. The letter that Shaolin brought was naturally out of Junko's sincerity, and the contents of the letter were not fake. This was something that Emperor Yenren could see at a glance. It was precisely because this letter was real that Emperor Yenren was even more shocked. After carefully reading the letter 3 times, he said with a serious face, "Little Lin Kun, please tell me the truth about what you saw and heard." Shaolin nodded and then told him in detail how he met Yang Qindong for the first time with the princess, how he was chased and had to live in the Yang family village and everything he saw later. It took more than an hour for Shaolin to finish telling the story. Then he looked at Yan Ren, who should be respected the most in Japan, and said, "Your Majesty, this Duke of Zhongdan is the most powerful and capable young man I have ever seen. It seems that there is nothing he can't do and there seems to be nothing he can't solve." "Wait, you mean he's very powerful? How is he compared to the general?" Hearing this, Yan Ren interrupted and asked, "He should be stronger than him. After all, when he was young, the general wasn't as powerful as he is now." Shaolin only hesitated for a moment before giving the answer quickly. Swish 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 swish. Yan Ren seemed to be very satisfied with such an answer and kept nodding his head. "Alright, tell me about the cannon." It was no wonder that he asked this question. A cannon was priced at 10 million taels of silver. Yan Ren believed that his daughter, Junko, knew what this amount of money meant, but she still wrote it in the letter and suggested to buy one. It was no wonder that Yan Ren valued it so much. In front of the emperor, Shaolin naturally didn't dare to hide anything. "Your Majesty, I have never seen the cannon when it was fired, but I have seen the terrible consequences after it was fired." Terrible consequences? Yes, it was like a barren land, as if the heavens were angry. Shaolin tried his best to describe the scene after he saw the cannon blast on Kurajing Street. However, Emperor Yenren's expression changed again and again when he heard these words. In his mind, he seemed to have sketched out a very shocking scene, and this scene was soon installed in the general's mansion. It was as if a cannon blast could kill Ashikaga Yoshimasa, and he would regain control of the highest authority in Japan. "I'll raise the money now and I'll leave the contact with the mercenaries to you. Don't let me down." Finally, Yenren made up his mind. Although 10 million taels of silver was a huge burden to him, in order to regain control of the country, he agreed without hesitation. "Hai!" Shaolin nodded excitedly. With such a heavy responsibility on his shoulders, he could imagine that once he succeeded, he would be put in an important position. By then, he might even stand at the top of Japan. Chapter 427. The mercenary camp outside Gaozhou Prefecture. The Emperor of Japan agreed to buy cannons and prepared 10 million taels of silver for this purpose. The news had already been sent to him. After reading it, Yang Qindong only ordered everything to proceed according to plan and handed it over to Commander Gao Xiong to handle. He threw this piece of information aside. Compared to Japan, which was far away at sea, Yang Qindong was more concerned about the situation in front of him. He was more concerned about whether or not he could be crowned king. Originally, Yang Qindong did not have such extravagant hopes. He only thought about how to use war to expand his military strength and get more things he needed. After all, if Lung Feng wanted to develop, it would not be possible without a sufficient population base. He did not want to use outsiders and trusted the Han people more, so he could only set his sights on the Great Ming. Facts had also proven that war was indeed the best way to test the strength of an army. At the same time, it was also the best opportunity to expand the army. He had obtained so many soldiers and taels of silver just by wiping out a motley crew of yellow bandits with only a few 100,000 people. This made Yang Qindong see the benefits that war could bring to him. However, he did not expect that the situation in Yunnan was so critical that Ingzong Qizhen threw aside the laws of the ancestors and gave Marquis Shiping the title of King of Shiping. One should not underestimate this title of king with a different surname. Once he had the identity of a king, he could open his own mansion and have his own army. Although the number of people could not exceed 3,000 for Yang Qindong, once he had this kind of power, there were probably not many places in the world that he could not go. There were too many benefits to becoming a king, so it was not an example. This made Yang Qindong very excited. However, he also knew that even if Mu Bin could be crowned king with a different surname, it was only a special event in a special period. It was not hereditary, so it was destined that the title of King of Shiping was only effective on Mu Bin. Otherwise, his descendants would not be able to enjoy such treatment. Even Mu Bin had so many backup plans when he was crowned king. If he wanted to be crowned king, it would be even more difficult. Not to mention that Zhu Qizhen had always been afraid of him. In this regard, the two brothers, Zhu Qizhen and Zhu Qiyu, had the same attitude. However, with the example before him, no matter how difficult it was, Yang Qindong had to fight for it. To him, this was definitely an opportunity. In the words of the commoners, if they missed this opportunity, they might not be able to find it again. With this goal in mind, when Kuang Yi came to visit him, he mentioned that he was very envious of Kuang Yi being conferred the title of king. At the same time, he pretended to be seriously ill in order to increase the chances of this matter becoming a reality. Of course, if he really wanted Zhu Qizhen to relent, just doing this was not enough. In other words, the more complicated the situation on the battlefield was, the more danger the southern Ming Empire was in, and the higher the chances of success would be. Therefore, during these days, Yang Qindong had been paying attention to the movement of Prince of Min's faction. After waiting for days and nights, they finally made a move. The Miao people were the first to react. This time, the Prince of Min's faction was able to defeat the southern Ming army and progress at lightning speed. The Miao people's help was completely inseparable. It was because of the Miao family's courage to fight, kill, and charge that the southern Ming army was defeated and lost a large amount of territory and land in a very short period of time. At that time, there was no such thing as 56 ethnic groups being one family. As a minority, they were often limited from birth. Their birth meant that they would not have much success in their lives. Things like being high up in the imperial court, that was something that they did not even want to think about. As a result, each generation was worse than the previous generation. In addition to the bad living environment, the lives of the Miao people were getting worse day by day. It was not until Zhu Qizhen established the southern Ming dynasty in Nanjing that he increased taxes in order to achieve his goal of recuperating faster. This made the Miao people, who did not have a good life to begin with, live an abyss of suffering under the heavy burden. Wherever there was oppression, there would be resistance. Just as the Miao family was suffering, the Prince of Min's messenger came and promised many benefits, which made some of the leaders of the Miao family tempted. After that, they started the war. When they left their hometown and went all the way to Guangdong, they finally knew what was called wealth. In comparison, it seemed that their previous lives were too poor. Under sudden wealth, it would often make a person dizzy and change their way of doing things. This was the case for the Miao army. They didn't have to spend much effort to take down a few cities. After grabbing a lot of good things, the greed in their hearts couldn't be suppressed. Gradually, they started to like the feeling of looting. The main force of the Prince of Min's faction was still digesting the cities in their hands and constantly recruiting soldiers to consolidate their strength. When the Jiaoji army was taking down cities, they did not forget to transfer good things and some people to their own country. Only the Miao army did not care about cities and did not think about conquering the world. They were more interested in the benefits in front of them. It could be said that they were short-sighted or unambitious. In short, they were the fiercest when it came to attacking cities. Often, after taking down a city, they would loot for a few days. Then, they would leave the city and move on to a new target, continuing the pace of attacking cities. As they looted and moved, it was the Miao family who had the least number of people that caused the most damage. In less than a month, they had destroyed more than a dozen cities and state capitals, and the number of people affected by the disaster had reached more than 1 million. The Miao army, which was divided into several groups, was like a swarm of locusts. Wherever they went, the crops would be destroyed and the people would be displaced. Supposedly, the south of the Great Ming dynasty had not experienced any wars for many years. The people were still rich. If it were other armies that came here, it would not be difficult to raise military provisions. However, the bad thing was that the people who came were Miao people. Not only did they snatch food, money, and women, they also burned the things that they could not eat. It was as if they were venting their poor lives over the years. Such actions naturally caused the number of victims in Yunnan, Guangxi, and Guangdong provinces to increase. Later on, when many people found out about the Miao army's actions, they did not wait for the Miao army to attack and left their homes with their families. Although people were not willing to leave the hometown that they had lived in for a long time, compared to being able to live, more people chose to leave home. Only a portion of the elderly who were old and had bad legs chose to stay. They looked like they would die in their hometown even if they died. The disaster of the Miao army was not inferior to the disaster of the Great Ming dynasty. This point was quickly reached and was publicly announced in the main hall of the southern Ming dynasty. Wang Zhua and a few other senior officials also wrote to the emperor, requesting that the emperor send troops to deal with the Miao army to save the people from this disaster. Some of these people were sincerely loyal to the country, and some were because their ancestral homes were in the 3 provinces. Among them there were some officials who were unlucky. Their hometowns were occupied and their fields were occupied by the Miao army. In their anger, they naturally hoped that the emperor would send troops to encircle them and help them regain everything that they had lost. There were more and more memorials asking for troops, covering the entire dragon table. Zhu Qizhen's expression also became more and more ugly. How could he not want to send troops to deal with the rebellion? But first he had to have the strength to do so. The Great Ming dynasty, especially the south, had not seen soldiers for a long time. From the results of Kuang Ye's previous inspection, after many years of recuperation, some of the southern Ming dynasty guards had some soldiers that could be used. However, they had their own mission. Guarding their own territory was their heavy responsibility. If they were to transfer these soldiers now and gather them to deal with the King of Min's rebellion, if there were too few people, there would be no effect on the overall situation. If there were too many people, the rear would be empty and there would be new rebellions. If that was the case, the southwest would change and the southeast would have trouble, then the southern Ming regime would be in danger. Robbing the east wall to pay the west wall. If the west wall collapsed because of this, the gains would not make up for the losses. But if they did not transfer troops, they would not be able to solve the problem at hand. Although the Ministry of War had already started to recruit soldiers, it still needed a certain amount of time. At this time, Kuang Ye's second urgent report was sent to Zhu Qizhen's desk. This report was about yesterday's matter of the brocade guard. After Wei Guang committed suicide, it emphasized that Yang Qindong was poisoned and that it was important to send troops to learn from Mu Bin and be crowned king. Trash, a bunch of trash. In the throne room, Zhu Qizhen, who had read the report, raised his hand and threw the urgent report to the head eunuch Chao Jixiang, who was serving him. Your Majesty, please calm down. Take care of your dragon body. Chao Jixiang still didn't know what had happened, so he knelt down on the ground with a frightened look. Calm down, calm down. Every day you only know how to calm down my anger. But you have to do something that makes me happy. That Wei Guang, not only did he fail to kill Mu Bin, but he also admitted everything. Not only did he cause me to be labeled as a meritorious official, but now he wants the throne from me. Tell me, should I give it to him or not? Zhu Qizhen, whose face was livid, roared and stared at Chao Jixiang to express his dissatisfaction. Chao Jixiang's face instantly paled. Your Majesty, does Yang Qindong want to be crowned king? Who else could it be other than him? Zhu Qizhen's voice implied this fact. That won't do. Hearing this, Chao Jixiang's eyes kept darting around as he spoke. Hearing Chao Jixiang say no, Zhu Qizhen became interested. My dear minister, why do you say no? Chao Jixiang, who was kneeling on the ground, quickly crawled forward and came to Zhu Qizhen's feet. He raised his head and said with a loyal expression, Your Majesty, it's a rule set by our ancestors that people with different surnames cannot be crowned king. King Shiping is an exception, but it turns out that it's not very useful to be crowned king with different surnames. Moreover, if we give it to whoever wants it, the world will be in chaos. Once the world is at peace, how will we deal with them? I'm afraid we can't get rid of them. Chapter 428. Chao Jixiang's voice was still echoing in Zhu Qizhen's ears, but the unlucky Emperor Yingzong didn't say anything. From the moment Mu Bin became the king of Shiping, he knew that some things were out of his control. Once he was bestowed the title of prince, it was equivalent to having his own prince's mansion and even his own guard army. Although the number of people could not be too large, the mountain was high and the emperor was far away. Who knew if there was a restless heart under the surface of obedience? Especially a king who became a king by fighting, who had killed a mountain of corpses and a sea of blood, had more specific military strength that couldn't be underestimated. But if he wasn't a king, how could they do their best? Marquis Mubin of Shiping was already the boss of Yunnan. There was nothing left to be conferred, nothing to be rewarded. If he wanted to use him as a bystander, there was no other way except for this move. He had no choice but to do this. Although the effect was not very good in any case with Mubin watching from the rear, it also took a lot of energy from King Min's side, so they couldn't attack the hinterland of the south. A king's title only played a role of restraint. Zhu Qizhen was a little dissatisfied in his heart, but what could he do? He was the emperor, the son of heaven, but if he didn't have enough strength, how many people would listen to him? For the emperor, being a king for the sake of fighting was tantamount to giving away part of his power, which might be regarded as a disgrace. At the very least, none of his ancestors had ever done such a thing. But it was still better than being forced to perish. If he persisted for the sake of face and finally let King Min's side come to Nanjing at that time, he would really be a sinner of the Zhu family, and he would have no face to see his ancestors. Thinking that the current situation was so erosive and difficult, Zhu Qizhen began to seriously consider what Kuang Yi said about Yang Qindong's proposal. "My dear minister, how is Duke Zhongdan's health? Also, I asked you to find a way to contact the mercenaries. Is there any progress?" When these things were mentioned, Chao Jixiang's face became very ugly. He, who was originally clamoring that he couldn't be conferred the title of king, quickly lowered his head and said, "Your Majesty, please calm down. This subject is incompetent." Chao Jixiang couldn't be blamed for saying that. Whether it was Yang Qindong or the mercenaries, the embroidered uniform guard hadn't made any progress in such a long time. Needless to say, the mercenaries had perfect military discipline. Furthermore, the soldiers who were qualified to serve in Crimson City had all been seriously tested in terms of loyalty. In addition, they did not go out on their own, so it was even more difficult for outsiders to find out about them. Even though the embroidered uniform guards seemed to be everywhere, they were unable to do anything in the face of such a disciplined army. Naturally, it was difficult for them to achieve any results. As for Yang Qindong's place, it was heavily guarded. Even the auxiliary troops could not get close. Only the elite cold vanguard, who had gone through many trials and tribulations, had the right to guard outside. Not to mention there were also the first and second guards, the elites of the elites. Under such heavy protection, it was as difficult as ascending to the heavens to investigate Yang Qindong's condition. The embroidered uniform guard had sent out many people, but most of them returned empty-handed. On the contrary, quite a few of them had gone missing. Chao Jixiang's words of incompetence expressed his helplessness toward Yang Qindong and the mercenaries. His words enraged Zhu Qizhen once again. "Incompetent, incompetent. Do you not know what else to say other than this? Scram, scram." "Yes, yes." Seeing that Zhu Qizhen was enraged again, Chao Jixiang, who knew that accompanying a monarch was like accompanying a tiger, immediately knelt and left. Zhu Qizhen was the emperor of the great Ming dynasty, second only to one and above all. He had inherited the legacy of his ancestors. But at the same time he had also inherited his ancestors' temperament, which was capricious. Who knew if he would punish Chao Jixiang in a fit of rage? Chao Jixiang left the hall, and the other eunuchs lowered their heads, not daring to speak. Not long after, a heavy sigh filled the hall. No one knew what the so-called true dragon, the son of heaven, was thinking at this moment. Gaozhou Prefecture. The Minister of War, Kuang Yi, sent 2 urgent secret letters to Emperor Yingzong, but he did not receive any reply even after a long time. At this time, extremely bad news spread over. The leader of the Heavenly Fortress camp, Miao Jinlong, who was given the title of Marquis by the Min King, was leading 80,000 troops from the Nanning Prefecture. The moment Kuang Yi received the news, he hurriedly summoned his generals to the front of the hall. At this moment, Ma Wei, Guanyin, Yu Guang, and the other generals all had ugly expressions. Below the hall, the scout general was reporting the battle reports he had received. Miao Jinlong's troops are very good at fighting. In terms of strength, they are second only to Yang Wenba of the Dumang stronghold. Since the start of the war, they had already taken over 4 cities and cities. Among them, the number of small counties that they had taken over was uncountable. Their army had also expanded from 10,000 people to 80,000 now. They are currently attacking the Lianzhou Prefecture and are not far from us. How many people are there in the Lianzhou Prefecture? Kuang Yi asked directly. Only 1,000. The scout general did not even dare to raise his head. Kuang Yi, who took in a cold breath, knew that Lianzhou could not be defended. 1,000 against 80,000, the result could be imagined. Report. Right at this moment, another scout entered the hall and whispered something into the ears of the general who was kneeling on the ground. The scout general's expression changed again and again. He then waved his hand and waited for his subordinates to leave. He said with a panicked expression, "I just received news that the general of the Lianzhou prefecture has surrendered." What? Kuang Yi, who had suddenly heard the latest battle report, staggered and fell to the side before losing his balance. Luckily, Guanyin reacted quickly and stretched out his hands to catch him. He also anxiously shouted, "Teacher, teacher, are you okay?" I'm fine, I'm fine." Kuang Yi, who took in a strong breath, his chest heaved up and down a few times. Then he steadied himself and waved his hand at Guanyin. Then he angrily scolded, "Bastards, a bunch of bastards. They received the kindness of the emperor and did not think of repaying it. They should be killed, their families should be wiped out, and their families should be wiped out." Kuang Yi angrily scolded. Unfortunately, the general of the Lianzhou prefecture could not hear him. Even if he heard it, he would not be afraid. After all, he had already surrendered. Who knew how long the South Ming could last? "Teacher, please calm down. Now that the Lianzhou prefecture has fallen, the next target will probably be our Gaozhou prefecture. As for how to deal with it, I need teacher to think." Guanyin saw that Kuang Yi could stand up on his own and took 2 steps back. "Deal with it? What else can we do? We have to defend the Gaozhou prefecture to the death. With me here, we will not let these traitors take a step forward." Even though Savage Kuang was old, his voice was like thunder. Kuang Yi had made the decision to defend the city to the death. As a student, Guanyin immediately cupped his hands and said, "Student is willing to follow teacher and defend the Gaozhou prefecture to the death." Guanying's words were heard by Ma Wei and Yu Guang. The two exchanged a glance before cupping their fists and saying, "We will follow the orders of the minister and defend Gaozhou prefecture to the death. We will fight to the death and not retreat." Ma Wei and Yu Guang did not have a choice. Even though they were in the Gaozhou prefecture, their families were not here. Their original place of defense was not Gaozhou. If they really surrendered like the Lianzhou prefecture general, once the news spread, their families would not be able to survive. Even if it was for the safety of their families, they had no other choice. Furthermore, with the minister of the Ministry of War here, even if they wanted to surrender, they had to be able to control the army. Hearing the words of the generals, Kuang Ye's expression became better. Good. His Majesty will definitely know of your loyalty. After we defeat the enemy this time, this official will definitely ask for rewards for all of you. Thank you, Minister. Guanyin and the other two lowered their heads and cupped their hands. However, whether or not they would really listen to this so-called request for merit was another matter altogether. First they agreed. Then Kuang Yi wrote an urgent letter to be sent to Nanjing. After reporting the situation here, he looked at Guanyin and the other two and said, "Immediately seal the city. At the same time, gather the youths in the city and help the soldiers defend the city." In the Gaozhou prefecture, there were at least 40,000 people. Among them there were 5,000 youths. If used well, it would be a significant force. "Teacher, should we inform the Duke of Loyalty and ask him to come to the city to help us defend the city?" When Guanyin saw that Kuang Yi didn't mention Yang Qindong, he thought that Kuang Yi was too anxious to remember, so he reminded him. "Sai, we can just send someone to inform them. However, if they are not willing to enter the city, we cannot force them." Kuang Yi thought about Yang Qindong's request and shook his head as he said half-heartedly. He didn't think that the little fox Yang Qindong would be willing to help him defend Gaozhou prefecture before he received a confirmation. Outside the Gaozhou prefecture, in the mercenary camp near the Lijiu prefecture, the battle report from the front line had already been sent here. Yang Qindong naturally knew that Miao Jinlong had led the troops here. "Ah, they are finally here?" Yang Qindong's attitude was completely different from Kuang Ye's. When he heard this, he didn't panic at all. Instead, he looked as if he already knew this would happen. "Young master, are we going to beat them up?" Hu Mang, who was standing at the side, asked excitedly. From his words, it was not whether they should fight or not, but whether they should beat them up. Just this point alone showed how confident he was in winning. Actually, it was not only Tiger's Mane. The 7,000 young army soldiers all thought the same. The auxiliary soldiers of the Cold Front were even more so. With their advanced weapons, they could look down on the world and not reject any strong enemy. Even the temporary auxiliary soldiers were full of confidence after being trained for such a long time and learning excellent tactics. They only wanted to gain military merits in one battle and become an auxiliary soldier. They wanted to become a member of the elite cold vanguard as soon as possible and be envied by everyone. Chapter 429. Why do we have to fight? Yang Chendong tilted his head and asked after hearing Tiger's Mane's words. Tiger's Mane didn't know how to answer the young master's question. Fortunately, Yang Chendong didn't point at him to answer. Instead, he said slowly, young master's goal was to force Zhu Qizhen to bow his head. Isn't the appearance of these people the best time to do so? If we chase them away right away, the problem will be solved. How can we force them to bow? Yes, young master is right. Tiger's Mane is too naive. Tiger's Mane was smart. After being pointed out by Yang Chendong, he understood everything and immediately replied. Mim, it's good that you know. Pass down the order. The camp will be in a defensive formation. Without orders, no one is allowed to leave the camp. Also, inform the logistics to prepare enough food and be prepared for a long standoff. Yang Chendong knew that Tiger's Mane wasn't the only one who wanted to send out troops. He was afraid that all the officers would have the same idea. Thus he passed down the order. Once a real and effective military order was formed, Lung Feng, who prioritized obeying orders, knew what to do. Just as Yang Chendong was passing down the order, Guanyin came to the camp as a representative of Nanming. He wanted to meet Yang Chendong and invite him to Gaozhou Prefecture to avoid trouble. As expected, Guanyin didn't even see Yang Chendong's face before Tiger's Mane sent him away. My young master's condition has worsened. He is not fit for any exercise. We appreciate Master Guan's kindness. We will stay here and guard the young master's body. When he recovers, we will leave. These words left Guanyin speechless. He could only hope that after the Miao army arrived and failed to take down Gaozhou Prefecture, they would make an example out of these mercenaries. This way they could just sit back and watch the tigers fight. Gaozhou Prefecture and Yang Chendong's troops had all made defensive preparations. 3 days later, Miao Jinlong's 80,000 soldiers finally appeared in the southwest. Miao Jinlong was from the Miao tribe and was born in a big family. He had practiced martial arts since he was young and was familiar with the art of war. He had also seen many instances of the Ming dynasty's army bullying the Miao people. He had always wanted to fight for the rights of the Miao people one day and hold his head high. However, the great Ming dynasty was too powerful. How could the Miao tribe, who had a weak population and territory, contend against them? He originally thought that this was just a childhood dream that he would never be able to realize in his lifetime. But who knew that the situation changed so quickly? The prosperous great Ming dynasty was divided into two. Then the king of Min raised his army. Miao Jinlong, who had been waiting, knew that the opportunity had come. He rose in revolt and became the first group of people in the Miao tribe to support the king of Min. He expressed his stance early and took practical actions. After a while, he gained the favor of the king of Min, Miao Jinlong, who was conferred the title of Marquis, led 10,000 Miao soldiers and was unstoppable. After winning every battle, the army grew stronger and stronger. Now they had 80,000 soldiers and became a very important force in the king of Min's faction. Some things, if you don't do it, you won't know. Maybe it was because he had been trapped in the Miao tribe for a long time. Miao Jinlong had always thought highly of the Ming dynasty. However, along the way he did not meet any opponents. Often when the army arrived, the city would fall by itself. Countless gold, silver, treasures, land and beauties were at his fingertips. He finally saw what was called a real life, what was called a life of enjoyment. He also saw how the Ming dynasty, which was praised by others, could not withstand a single blow. After experiencing more, his horizons were broadened. Naturally, his heart grew bigger. Just as the king of Min's main force was still consolidating and absorbing the fruits of victory, Miao Jinlong could no longer hold back. After asking for instructions, he led the 80,000 soldiers and started to sweep through the entire Guangdong. Attacking the Lianzhou prefecture was just the beginning. His goal was to enter Gaozhou, Laizhou, Guanghai guards, and the southwest of the Guangzhou prefecture from Lianzhou. He wanted to be the vanguard to cooperate with the king of Min's main force to attack the Guangzhou prefecture. Lianzhou won the battle and the Lianzhou general surrendered and opened the city. This seemed to be a good start. Miao Jinlong was overjoyed and led his troops to seize the city for a day. On the second day he went straight to Gaozhou prefecture. In his eyes, Guang prefecture was the only place to rest. The other prefectures were just steps to wealth and power. It was because of this idea that when the troops arrived at the Gaozhou prefecture, he sent people as usual to persuade them to surrender. The people were sent out, but only corpses returned. Guanyin was ordered to kill the messenger with an arrow. This is so infuriating. How dare you kill the messenger? Men surround the city, attack the city. When Miao Jinlong saw the messenger's corpse, he could not help but be furious. He immediately ordered to prepare to attack the city. My king, please calm down. Just as the other generals in the tent were enraged and were about to fight to be the vanguard, a voice rang out in the tent. Then, a man dressed in a long gown and dressed like a scholar walked out from the ranks. Mr. Zhou? Seeing the person who walked out, Miao Jinlong furrowed his brows. Then he relaxed and asked kindly, Mister, why are you stopping me from sending troops? It is for the good of my king and all the generals. The man called Mr. Zhou said in a neither servile nor overbearing manner. Mr. Zhou's original name was Zhou. He was originally from Yunnan. Because he once offended a steward of the Marquis Sheeping House, he was stripped of his scholar status. In a fit of anger, he went to where the Miao people lived and married into their family, becoming the son-in-law of the Miao family. Because he was literate and knowledgeable, he was chosen by Miao Jinlong and kept by his side. Zhou was worthy of being called a scholar. He had contributed a lot to Miao Jinlong's plan along the way. Even when the Ming king sent people to contact them, he was the first to stand up and support them. Zhou not only focused on attacking but also on attacking the heart. It was because of this that when he attacked the Lianzhou house, he did not lose a single soldier and obtained a city. All of this made Miao Jinlong admire him. In addition, this person had been in the Miao family for 10 years and even had a few children. There was no problem with his loyalty and he was very trusted. When he saw that it was this person who stood out, he was not angry. Instead he asked kindly, "Let's hear it." Hearing that it was for his own good, Miao Jinlong asked with interest. Facing Miao Jinlong's amiable attitude and the angry expressions of the other generals, Zhou was neither servile nor overbearing. With a calm expression he said, "My king generals, you must remember that our ally in Guangdong, Huang Yuliang, was completely wiped out, right?" "Of course." Miao Jinlong nodded his head. Due to his identity he had never met young Master Huang or even his messenger. However, he knew that they had an ally in Guangdong. It was because of this ally that they were able to reduce the pressure on them in Yunnan, allowing them to achieve great things. Then do you know why young Master Huang was defeated? Let me tell you, he was defeated by the Ming army in front of you. Zhou said with a very firm tone. The reason he knew this was mainly because he was good at gathering information. He was not like the ordinary Miao soldiers who only knew how to fight and fight. There was such a thing? Miao Jinlong, who was originally curious about what Zhou would say, could not help but change his expression when he heard this. He finally understood why Zhou did not agree to him attacking the city. So what if there is? Miao Jinlong did not speak, but it did not mean that his generals were afraid of anything. Among them, General Zhang Tseng said with a fearless tone. That only proves that young Master Huang is too weak. If it were our Miao soldiers, we would definitely make the southern Ming army cry for their parents on the battlefield and know how powerful we are. That's right, that's right. After the other generals heard Zhang Tseng's words, they all agreed. During this period of time they had dealt with and fought with the southern Ming army. However, the facts proved that this was just an army that looked strong on the outside but had ordinary combat strength. There was nothing to be afraid of. Huang Yuliang's defeat was definitely due to his own lack of strength. No. You are all wrong. Faced with the unanimous opinion of so many generals, Zhou refuted with the strength of a weak scholar. You all have only won a few battles, but you do not know that there is always someone stronger. Why don't you think about it? Since the Ming dynasty was able to conquer such a large country, how could they be weak? The reason why we aren't a match for them now is because our tempo is too fast. They weren't prepared and weren't able to adapt. However, once they are given enough time to deploy their troops, who can guarantee that we will continue to win? Not to mention, the ones who defeated young Master Huang weren't the southern Ming Empire's army, but the most mysterious mercenaries that they spent a large sum of money to hire. Zhou did indeed understand a lot. This was also related to the education he received. It was precisely because he had read more books that he naturally had more knowledge and had more considerations. For example, studying the opponent was something that must be done. Mercenary army? When the generals heard this new name for the first time, they all looked at each other with a puzzled expression. Zhou did not expect them to understand anything. He only needed to tell them what he knew. As for what to do next, whether or not they had to continue attacking the city, it was not something that he could decide. Yes, it is the mercenary army. It was this army that once saved the life of the southern Ming Emperor, Yingzong's life on the battlefield. It was also this army that defeated the Walla cavalry that wanted to enter the capital of Baiming. It was also this army that defeated young Master Huang, who was very influential in Guangdong. These are their achievements after they made their debut. He spoke truthfully about everything that he knew. Then Zoda continued, if we want to attack the city, we will definitely not be able to avoid them. How much confidence do we have? As for where to go, I ask my king and the generals to discuss this. Chapter 430. Zoda shut his mouth and did not want to argue with anyone about this matter. He was originally a Han Chinese, but because he was treated unfairly and could not survive, he came to the Miao tribe and became the son-in-law of the Miao tribe. A person like him actually had a very low social status. He couldn't even be considered the head of a family. How many people would think highly of him? If Miao Jinlong did not see that he did have some ability and put him in an important position, he would not be qualified to enter the tent for discussion, let alone argue with others. Zoda shut his mouth, which made the others unable to find an object to argue with for a while. They all looked at King Miao Jinlong. The Miao tribe also had a very strict hierarchy, especially when it came to major matters such as the deployment of troops on the battlefield. The king's order was the final order. Everyone's eyes were on him, which made Miao Jinlong silent. Although it seemed that the journey was very smooth and the army was also growing step by step. From the original 10,000 people to the current 80,000 people, it was a strong army. However, no one knew better than Miao Jinlong about his own strength. The so-called expansion of the army was just these soldiers who were forced to join. Most of them joined the army to fill their stomachs, unlike the Miao family that he led in the beginning. They were born to conquer the world and be proud of the heroes. They did not even have a goal. Such an army could only fight a smooth battle. Once they encountered a tough opponent, they were likely to be heavily injured or even defeated. It was possible that they could lose their lives. The great Ming dynasty could occupy the world until now. If it was said that they did not have a capable army, even Miao Jinlong himself would not believe it. Just like now, didn't they encounter one? A head-on clash was far from what he wanted to see. Where there were people, there would be underworld. This saying was also applicable in the army. For any organization, no matter what the intention was, as long as time passed, factions would appear. It was something that could not be stopped. Unless the system was very strict, if there was a great soul leading the army, these problems could be suppressed. Just like the King of Min's faction now. Everyone treated the King of Min as the core, but it was undeniable that which general did not have their own thoughts? If you want to be respected by others, if you want to share the benefits, the prerequisite is to have enough strength. Only then will others respect you, value you, and not neglect you. How to expand their own strength while winning the battle, or at least to preserve their own strength, became the most important thing in the eyes of the kings. If everything was as Zoda said, and the Ming army in front of them and the mercenaries in front of them were very powerful, then choosing such a tough opponent was originally an unwise thing. What was the meaning of winning if they used up all their forces and severely injured the enemy? It was just making a wedding dress for others. It was because of this desire to preserve their strength that Miao Jinlong listened to Zoda's words. He then said to the generals looking at him, "Forget it, since the Ming army in front of us is not so easy to deal with, we do not need to make too many sacrifices. We will just surround them and wait for their morale to drop and surrender. How about this? We will first move out of Laizhou Prefecture and take the nearby cities. General Zhang Zheng, listen up, I will give you 10,000 troops. Go around Gaozhou Prefecture and take Laizhou City. Remember, if the Ming army does not take the initiative to stop you, do not casually provoke them. Think about the big picture, understand?" Miao Jinlong finally gave the order. He listened to Zoda's suggestion and did not take a head-on approach. Instead, he only surrounded the city and lowered the enemy's morale first. Then he would have the opportunity to take Gaozhou Prefecture without bloodshed and complete his strategic mission. After the king gave the order, General Zhang Tseng stepped out to receive it. Not long after, the 10,000 Miao family soldiers rushed out of the camp and went around the border of Gaozhou Prefecture, heading straight for Laizhou Prefecture in the south. After the Miao army arrived, they did not immediately attack the city. Instead, they acted as if they were going to surround the city. This caused General Yu Guang, who had already prepared to defend Gaozhou City, to be puzzled. However, he soon found out from General Wei that it was probably because the enemy was afraid of the mercenaries. Yu Guang was still thinking about how powerful the mercenaries were. Just their name alone was enough to scare people into not daring to make a move. The Miao army actually started to move again. They went straight from Gaozhou Prefecture to the mercenaries' camp 5 li south. Don't tell me they want to attack the mercenaries first? But it seems like they only have 10,000 troops. Is that even useful? The deputy general beside Yu Guang voiced out his doubts while revealing an expression of disbelief. Idiot, they are probably going to attack Lijiao Prefecture. Yu Guang glared at the deputy general beside him with an expression that said, "You are really stupid." Then he quickly sent someone to report this news to the Minister of War, Kuang Yi, who was waiting in the government office. 5 li south of Gaozhou Prefecture, the mercenaries' camp. When the scouts noticed that the Miao army was moving towards their camp, they quickly reported it. Tiger's Mane did not dare to delay after hearing the news. He ordered Luo Per and the others to prepare for battle while rushing to the large tent where the young master was resting. At this moment Yang Qindong was very satisfied. He was enjoying the fruits that the two ladies fed him. If he wanted to eat bananas he would have them peeled and delivered to his mouth. If he wanted to eat grapes he would have them washed and delivered to his mouth. Even if he wanted to eat apples he would have them peeled and delivered to his mouth. With beauties by his side and delicious food in front of him, Yang Qindong could not help but feel like he was not thinking about the world anymore. Fortunately, in his previous life, in order to complete all kinds of missions, he had taken on all kinds of roles. In order to complete the missions he had to act like he was. He could really endure hardships and enjoy blessings. Everything in front of him was just child's play. He could not lose Yang Qindong's nature. Outside the large tent, hurried footsteps could be heard, followed by Tiger's Mane's anxious voice. "Young master, the Miao army is moving. They are rushing towards our direction." Although his voice was a little hurried, he was not panicked. It was obvious that Yang Qindong had already prepared for this kind of situation. It was very simple. If someone attacked, then they just had to fight back. After Tiger's Mane reported, he respectfully stood in place. After a few breaths of time, the large tent was opened from the inside. Yang Qindong, dressed in green, walked out with a serious expression. "Let's go, we will go take a look at this Miao army." The intelligence had described the Miao people and the Miao army more than once, but he had never seen them with his own eyes. With the idea of knowing oneself and knowing one's enemy, Yang Qindong decided to personally take a look. The Miao army was indeed heading straight for the mercenaries' camp. When they were only 2 li away they suddenly turned and passed by. This obviously provocative action caused many of the cold vanguard soldiers who had already gripped their spears to glare angrily. Some of the soldiers even turned their heads to look at the platoon leaders and company commanders beside them. Their intention to fight was very obvious. Ever since the mercenaries were established, they had shocked the world with a single brilliant feat. What the people of the great Ming dynasty knew was that they first saved Emperor Yingzong on the battlefield, then defeated Walla's elite cavalry, then fought bravely against the Huang bandits and quelled the rebellion in Guangdong. Each and every one of them had the aura of being invincible the moment Lung Feng was unleashed. How could such a proud army allow others to provoke them? Keep your eyes on the target. Without orders no one is to act rashly. Otherwise prepare to retire early. The company commanders and platoon leaders who were being stared at by those cold gazes naturally felt the pressure. They were extremely dissatisfied, but it was the duty of a soldier to obey orders. This was especially true for those who joined the cold front. Obeying orders was an extremely important task for them. Even if there were no orders from above, they could not evade the enemy's spear even if it pierced their chest. This was the most basic requirement to become an iron army, a strong army. Without orders to attack, the cold front, including some of the auxiliary soldiers who were ready for the second attack, could only watch as the 10,000-strong Miao army brushed past them. Speaking of which, the distance between the two sides was only about 300 meters. Those with good eyesight could even see the facial features of the other side. Therefore they could see the mocking gazes of the Miao soldiers. "General, it seems like these so-called mercenaries are nothing more than this. We are already so close to them, but I don't see a single brave soldier daring to rush out of the camp to find trouble with us. It seems like they don't live up to their name." Some of the junior leaders in the Miao army gathered together and laughed. General Zhang Zhang, who was riding on a horse and walking in the middle of the group, also laughed when he heard the discussion of his subordinates. "That's right, they don't even have the courage to walk out of the camp. In my eyes they're just a bunch of cowards. Once we take down Lijiao Prefecture, I will naturally tell the king to start with these mercenaries. Haha, I want to see what that scholar Zhou has to say when the time comes." "General, you're wise." The group of junior leaders hurriedly flattered. Following that, the 10,000-strong Miao soldiers walked past the mercenaries' camp with high morale. Each of them seemed to walk with their heads held high, as if they were extremely arrogant. "Young master, it seems like they don't have any intentions of attacking us. They are going to Lijiao Prefecture. However, there is no one there. The city is also empty. What are they going to do there? Hu Meng watched as the 10,000 Miao soldiers walked past the front of the military camp. After walking for 2 hours in a grandiose manner, he saw through their purpose. Chapter 431. Hearing Tiger's Mane's puzzled question, Yang Qindong nodded and said, "Yes, we know that Lijiao Prefecture is an empty city, but others don't know that. What will they do when they find out that there is no one there?" Tiger's Mane was originally listening to Yang Qindong's words, but when there was suddenly no more, he asked in confusion, "What do we do?" "Yes, what do we do? This young master is asking you a question." Yang Qindong nodded and looked at Tiger's Mane seriously. Tiger's Mane saw that Yang Qindong was testing him, so he quickly racked his brains. However, perhaps because of the suddenness of the situation or perhaps because of his nervousness, he couldn't come up with a reason. He could only stammer, "Young master, Tiger's Mane is slow-witted, he doesn't know what will happen next." A long sigh with disappointment in his eyes. Tiger's Mane was good at everything, but he was used to relying on himself. How could he be entrusted with important tasks in the future? The good thing was that he liked Tiger's loyalty and complete obedience to orders. As for his shortcomings, he would become stronger with more practice. "Alright then, young master will tell you. When I looked at the Miao army just now, they were very arrogant, as if they didn't put us or any other army in their eyes. Usually, such an army's morale is very high, and they won't be too weak in battle. However, they often have a fatal flaw, and that is arrogance. On the battlefield, if they are too arrogant and don't put their opponents in their eyes, the consequences will be very serious, and they may even lose their lives." Yang Qindong's voice was still echoing in the air. Tiger's Mane, Beta Persei, Luopa and the other regiment and battalion officers all had a thoughtful expression on their faces. They also seemed to be wondering if their own army was too arrogant. Would they also make the mistake of underestimating the enemy? Seeing that everyone was deep in thought, Yang Qindong's eyes revealed a satisfied expression. It was almost impossible for an army to remain undefeated for its entire life. There were too many factors involved, such as morale, willpower, advanced weapons, whether the commanding general gave the correct orders, whether the soldiers were united, whether they were brave, whether they dared to risk their lives on the battlefield, and even factors such as the right time, location, people, whether they had a good reason for their actions, whether they were righteous, whether the army had a soul, whether the soldiers had faith, whether the soldiers were of the same mind, and so on and so forth. It could be said that victory in this war was not determined by who had more people or whose weapons were more advanced. It was just like during the war's war, of course. Our armies is main was Main's main. This was his main was main. The cold front had too many advantages. For example, their advanced weapons, strict training, strict military laws, and uniform thinking and behavior among the soldiers. However, this did not mean that every battle could be won. Changes were ever present. How to deal with and resolve these sudden changes was also the key to victory. Beating them down was even more necessary. A person could have a lofty and unyielding character, but he couldn't have an arrogant heart. Otherwise he would fall sooner or later. It was just a matter of time. Using today's opportunity, Yang Qindong was knocking on the heads of the various regimental and battalion-level officers. Seeing that everyone was deep in thought and understood his intentions, he continued, "A proud army will never return empty-handed. However, an operation without a goal or plan was often the cause of failure. Take this 10,000 Miao army for example. If they return empty-handed after going to Lijiao Prefecture and reunite with the Miao army's main force, then even if they fail, they will not be at fault. On the other hand, if their arrogance is at play and they want to take something back to deal with us, then their calculations will be wrong, and the consequences will be very serious." "Young master, are you saying that when the Miao army returns empty-handed, they will attack us? But isn't that a little too bold?" Tiger's Mane finally understood the meaning behind Yang Qindong's words and asked with a face of disbelief. These words came from Yang Qindong's mouth. If it was anyone else, Tiger's Mane would not have believed it and would even say that the other party was just trying to scare them. "Are you brave? Ever since they left Yunnan, they have not met any opponents. How can such an army not be proud? What's so strange about them making some bold moves?" Yang Qindong said all of this confidently. He only needed to confirm that the 10,000 Miao army would definitely attack them. Since Yang Qindong had said so, Tiger's Mane immediately said excitedly, "Young master, then let's prepare properly and teach them a lesson when they come." Yes, preparation is a must. However, there's no need to be too nervous. Didn't Gao Xiong bring some newly developed mines from the munitions factory when he came? Bury some of them. If they dare to come, let them know what it means to scatter flowers from heaven. Yang Qindong was not completely sure that the 10,000 Miao army would attack them. Before he had any definite information, there was no need to make the soldiers so nervous. All he needed to do was to bury the mines and prepare for defense. If they really came, the effect would be surprisingly good. When the Lung Feng army attacked together, the 10,000 Miao army would basically be useless. Yes. Yang Qindong's words were equivalent to an order. The 2nd Regiment commander of the Lung Feng army, Luo Pe, who had been standing at the side for a long time, immediately nodded in agreement. Then he watched as the young master left. However, they did not leave even after a long time. Instead, after Luo Pe and political commissar Kong Jia had a discussion, they decided to pass on Yang Qindong's words to every battalion, company and platoon leader. They wanted to let them know that it was okay to have pride, but having pride would easily lead to failure. At the same time, they also discussed some actions that might be needed to take in the upcoming events. Since the 6th young master said that the Miao army would attack them because of their victory, it did not matter if it would happen or not. The necessary preparations must be made. Previously, when Gao Xiong brought a ship to Laizhou Prefecture to pick them up, he brought a lot of guns, ammunition and crossbows. Now they were all equipped and brought into the army. Every Lung Feng army was also equipped with 5 bullets. It was enough to deal with some large battles. However, no one knew what would happen next. No one knew when the next replenishment of ammunition would be. In order to ensure that there was enough ammunition, Luo Pe suggested that unless absolutely necessary, it was best to use cold weapons first. This was perhaps the Lung Feng army's weakness. Without air transportation or even ground transportation, ammunition became a huge problem. Even if Yang Qindong was around and they could retrieve the items from the warehouse at any time, they couldn't do such a thing unless it was absolutely necessary. It wasn't like they could find a good excuse every time something happened, not to mention that there was only one Yang Qindong, but there was more than one cold front team now. Political commissar Kong Jia agreed with Luo Pe's suggestion and the Lung Feng army began to get busy. First they dug the mines. In order to prevent others from seeing them, they worked in the dark. At the same time, other than Lung Feng Wusheng's 4 companies of the 1st Battalion who were still using advanced firearms, the other 2 battalions' 8 companies, a total of 800 Lung Feng soldiers, also took out their sharp bayonets and prepared for close combat. Using the words of 2nd Battalion Commander Qin Bo and 3rd Battalion Commander Kong Chuanxin, they wanted to show the auxiliary and temporary auxiliary soldiers that even in the face of cold weapons, the valiance of the cold front was unrivaled. Southern Ming capital Nanjing Prefecture. Kuang Yi rushed all the way here and finally placed it in front of Zhu Qizhen's dragon desk. When he heard what Kuang Yi said, that Miao Jinlong and his army of 80,000 had started to head south, and after taking over the Lianzhou Prefecture, they headed straight for the Gaozhou Prefecture, Zhu Qizhen could no longer remain calm. According to his thoughts and the analysis of some of the court officials, Min Min had already taken over Min. The king of Min had just obtained most of the territories in Yunnan, Guangxi and Guangdong. It was time to stop and digest them. At least in the short term there should not be any military action. However, it seemed that they had underestimated the enemy's appetite and ambition. In the court, when the officials heard the news, they all panicked. Especially the newly appointed left assistant minister Chen Ruyan. He was so nervous that he was sweating profusely. Kuang Yi was not in court. The former left assistant minister Wang Ji had misjudged the situation and had been arrested and interrogated. However, because he was still in Shiping Manor in Yunnan and because the road back was full of King of Min's rebel army, he was not immediately taken back to Jingdou for interrogation. With the loss of 2 important figures, Chen Ruyan was promoted to the position of left assistant minister and also to manage the affairs of the Ministry of War. Normally, Chen Ruyan would be overjoyed to receive such a position. However, in such a dangerous situation, taking over the Ministry of War was like taking over a mess. How could he not be frustrated? Luckily, Chen Ruyan was quite capable. In fact, in history he had once held the position of Minister of War. Even if the situation was a little dangerous, with his strong ability, he had come up with some good countermeasures. For example, when the entire southern Ming dynasty started to recruit soldiers, any male between 16 and 40 years old could sign up. The requirement was that each family had to send 1 person. If there were more and they were willing to join the army, 1 person could pay a year's worth of taxes. Once the world was peaceful, These people would not be recorded in the army and could regain their freedom. They could choose to do farming or business. Chapter 432. Qin Ruiyan's policy was very good, and it attracted a large number of people to join the army. Statistics showed that the newly recruited soldiers in the southern Ming Empire had reached 1 million. This was because the financial pressure of the Ministry of Revenue was too great. Otherwise, it would not be difficult to double this number. This was the benefit of having a strong foundation. It had to be said that the great Ming Empire was still very powerful. If it was not for the appearance of Yang Qindong, it would be like history. It would not be a big problem to continue for a few hundred years. The actions of the Ministry of Military Personnel were seen by Zhu Qizhen of Yingzhong, and he praised them twice. Now they only needed to wait for the training of these recruits to be completed before they could enter the battlefield. With so many fresh troops, it would not be a problem to wipe out the King of Min's rebel army. But at this time the King of Min's faction, who was estimated to be biding their time, made a move. If they could not be effectively controlled, it would not take long for them to reach out for a yard after getting an inch. The other rebel army would follow suit. It was afraid that before the training of the recruits was completed, the King of Min's faction would kill their way to the front of Nanjing Prefecture. The southern Ming Empire's regime might face the danger of ending. With the danger of the country being destroyed, how could Zhu Qizhen not be anxious? With a trace of blood in his eyes, he looked at the officials in the court. Dear officials, is there any way to control the situation? It doesn't need too long. It can last for a year. No, 9 months is enough. Zhu Qizhen asked anxiously, but what he got was silence. These officials could usually speak some reason or even twisted reason when they encountered problems. In the face of military affairs, the officials now had a very good interpretation of what it meant to be a scholar meeting a soldier. In the face of the King of Min's faction who did not talk reason at all, it seemed that any method was useless. Just like 2 days ago the Minister of Rights, Lu De, had proposed that they should first negotiate with the King of Min. Of course this kind of negotiation was fake. The real thing was to stabilize the situation and delay time. Although this policy made Zhu Qizhen somewhat unhappy, considering that it could maintain the situation and buy more time to prepare, he gritted his teeth and agreed. But who would have thought that when Lu De solemnly arranged for someone to do this, the envoy sent out a firm refusal before he even arrived in front of Prince of Min. Under such favorable circumstances, with the cooperation of Jiaoji and Miao Jun, only a fool would agree to sit down and negotiate with the southern Ming Empire. The standard of negotiation was that everyone's strength was equal, and no one could do anything to the other. Only then could such a method be used. When one party's power was too great, it would be difficult to negotiate. It was precisely because the method had already been tried that all of the officials shut their mouths, looking as if they were unable to come up with a solution. In fact, it wasn't that there was no way. At least there were 2 paths in front of Zhu Qizhen. First, they had to take the initiative to submit to Ming, and then cede a few provinces in a peaceful situation. This way they would be able to obtain the help of Zhu Qiyu, the acting head of Ming. Then he could borrow troops to destroy the King of Min's faction. Second, they had to agree to Kuang Ye's condition of giving Yang Qindong the throne. This way, as long as the mercenaries were willing to help, even if they couldn't immediately suppress the King of Min's rebellion, they could buy enough time. After the training of the new recruits was completed, the southern Ming Empire would be at peace. However, Zhu Qizhen didn't want to choose the first of these 2 paths. His cousin had seized the throne while the other party was in a precarious position. This had already made him very unhappy. If Yang Shan had not suddenly disobeyed him and disappeared, he would not have acknowledged the fact that the other party was Emperor Ming even now. If he lowered his head now, wouldn't it prove that he was inferior to the other party? If that was the case, people who didn't know the situation would think that the other party was the legitimate one. This was definitely not what Zhu Qizhen wanted to see. Even now, he still wanted to kill his way to the southern Ming Empire and unify the great Ming Empire. Wouldn't this be his own goal and hope? As for the second point, Zhu Qizhen also didn't want to give Yang Qindong the title of king with a different surname. Yang Qindong was really too outstanding. He was so outstanding that Zhu Qizhen was very afraid of him. If taking the first path was to end one's own future goal, then choosing the second path was to end one's own grave. Yang Qindong was only 21 years old and he was already given the title of king with a different surname. If he still needed him in the future, how would he reward him? Could it be that he had to give up the throne? Moreover, once he was given the title of king with a different surname, it would easily create a situation where he couldn't get rid of his subordinates. If he wanted to solve this problem in the future, he didn't know how much he would have to pay. As for what the genie guard said about Yang Qindong's poor health and being poisoned, Zhu Qizhen didn't dare to fully believe it. Yang Qindong had given him too many surprises, so it was reasonable that he couldn't fully believe it. This led to the gathering of the ministers, wanting to see if any of them could come up with a better idea. But now Zhu Qizhen was somewhat disappointed. Incompetent, incompetent. He cursed in his heart. Zhu Qizhen had to choose the lesser of two evils. It was time for him to make a decision. In the end, his heart was biased toward the second choice. Forget it and the court. The 6 ministers and the imperial censor stay behind to discuss matters in the side hall. Zhu Qizhen called the several important officials to the side hall. Naturally, there was only one matter, and that was to discuss the matter of giving Yang Qindong the title of king. Since no one could think of a better idea, they could only consider this matter. Fortunately, Mu Bin had been given the title of king with a different surname before. This wasn't the first time he had done such a thing. In other words, it wasn't the first time he had lost face. So what if it happened again? Those who could become important officials were all quick-witted and good at reading people's expressions. Otherwise, they wouldn't have been able to keep their positions. When Zhu Qizhen summoned them, they all guessed the emperor's intention. So when they entered the side hall, they all lowered their heads and didn't speak. Obviously, no one wanted to mention this matter first to avoid tarnishing their reputation. Cough. Sitting on the golden dragon throne, Zhu Qizhen's expression was a bit ugly. Seeing that no one spoke, he coughed lightly to attract everyone's attention. But in the eyes of the ministers who had weathered countless storms, this was completely useless. Even the left assistant minister of the Bureau of Military Personnel, Qin Rian, who represented Kuang Yi, lowered his head in silence. It was as if there was a beautiful scenery under his feet. He couldn't move his eyes or raise them at all. Seeing everyone's reaction, Zhu Qizhen was displeased. Although he knew that whoever spoke of this matter would be looked down upon in the history books, someone had to do it. Could it be that he, the emperor, had to do it himself? Did he think that what he did in the history books wasn't shameful enough? The emperor was the emperor. Since the officials didn't take the initiative to speak, he would call them out one by one. He thought, "You forced me to do this." When Zhu Qizhen spoke, the first person he called out was the Minister of History, Qin Sun. "Beloved official Qin, as the Minister of Personnel, you should have a reputation for discerning people. Is there any way to resolve the current situation?" Since ancient times, the Ministry of Personnel had a saying that officials were one level higher than officials. As the Minister of Personnel, who was in charge of the promotion, evaluation, and recommendation of officials, he was often described as the heavenly official of the Ministry of Personnel. Usually, as long as he had enough experience, he would be the leader of the officials. Immediately calling out Qin Sun's name showed that he didn't have any intention of picking on the weak. He was really forcing everyone to state their position. Especially when he said that he had a reputation for discerning people, Qin Sun couldn't refuse. This also made Minister Qin, who was standing there, suffer. Although Zhu Qizhen's words were gentle, if one carefully thought about the meaning behind them, as long as one wasn't a fool, one could sense the threat. Perhaps Zhu Qizhen was giving the officials a choice. Either they said what he wanted to say, or they could only accept some infamy. Or they could take it head-on and be prepared to lose their position. One was fame and the other was benefits. They had to choose one. They couldn't take all the benefits. Qin Sun's expression was very ugly. He was in a complicated struggle, considering what to do. What to say? What kind of gains and losses would there be? "Your Majesty, this official has something to say." Just as Qin Sun was thinking about how to respond to the emperor, the Minister of Rites, Lu Da, finally spoke. He held his ceremonial tablet and took a step forward. Originally, Zhu Qizhen was about to get angry and give Qin Sun a good beating. He might even find a reason to remove him from his position. However, Lu Da suddenly stood up. This made Zhu Qizhen happy. Thinking that he still had loyal officials by his side, he did his best to make his expression as good as possible. "Beloved official Lu, what do you have to say?" "Yes, Your Majesty." Lu Da nodded and lowered his cupped hands. Then, with a calm gaze, he said, "Your Majesty, the situation in the southwest is chaotic. It's about to spread. Our army still needs some time to train. As the saying goes, distant water can't quench a present thirst. In this official's opinion, it's better to appoint a king with a different surname and have him lead the army in battle to protect the great Ming's future." Not only did Lu Da stand up, but he also took the initiative to talk about the appointment of a king. This made Zhu Qizhen very happy. Beloved official Lu's words are very much to our liking. Many thanks, Your Majesty. After Lu De received the praise, he quickly put on a humble appearance. Then he continued, it's just that the appointment of a king is a big matter. In this official's opinion, we must not be rash, especially the Duke of Loyalty. He once served Ming Daizong. Now his family is also there. For such a big matter we must first discuss it with them. Otherwise, I'm afraid that we won't be recognized by everyone in the world and it will be easier for trouble to arise. Hearing Lu De's sudden new question, Zhu Qizhen nodded thoughtfully and said, Beloved official, Lu's words are very reasonable. Then, in your opinion, what should be the explanation? Your Majesty, we should first send someone to discuss this matter with Daizong. As long as both sides reach a consensus, the appointment of a king with a different surname can be carried out and the people of the world won't talk about it. Therefore, this official is willing to ask Your Majesty to give the Ministry of Rights some time. This official will immediately send someone to do it. As for the Duke of Loyalty, we can first notify him to lead the army to retreat. After he resolves the rebellion, presumably the matter of the appointment of a king will be settled. It'll be a good time to confer the title. This way both sides won't be delayed. Chapter 433. It was as if Lu De had already thought of a countermeasure. As he spoke without hesitation. When the conditions were right, success would come naturally. That's true. Zhu Qizhen nodded after Lu De's explanation. However, a few more questions popped up. He couldn't help but ask, if that's the case, will the Duke of Zhongdan be willing? Also, how confident are you in convincing Ming? In Zhu Qizhen's opinion, they couldn't truly be bestowed the title of king. What if Yang Qindong didn't agree? Also, the southern Ming Empire had no choice but to be bestowed the title of king. Ming wouldn't suffer any losses. Would they be willing to admit it? At the very least, if it was him, he probably wouldn't agree. For example, Yang Qindong was the Duke of Zhongdan. Even now, Ming's officials still referred to him as the Duke of Zhongdan. Since Lu De had stood up and made such a suggestion, it was natural that he had thought about these problems long ago. When he heard Zhu Qizhen's question, he smiled and said, Your Majesty, there's no need to worry. Since Your Majesty has already bestowed the title, if the Duke of Zhongdan isn't satisfied, once the news spreads, I'm afraid everyone will rise up and criticize him. Sometimes spittle can drown people. I'm sure the Duke of Zhongdan knows this very well. As for whether Ming will agree or not, Your Majesty, that's not a problem we need to consider. If they don't agree, you can tell the Duke of Zhongdan and let him deal with it. In short, Your Majesty is wise. Lu De didn't say what if. However, Zhu Qizhen already understood. If Ming didn't approve of the title of king, Yang Qindong would definitely be very angry. This was a good opportunity to drive a wedge between them. If things didn't go well, it was possible for both sides to fight. At that time he would really be able to reap the benefits. Thinking that if Yang Qindong and Ming were to fight to the death, it would be a chance for the South Ming Empire to rise again. Immediately, his face lit up with joy as he said, Beloved official, Lu is indeed worthy of being this subject's backbone. Good. Everything will be done according to your wishes. Chao Jixiang, draft a decree for me. Originally, he was still having a headache over the fact that he had to confer another king with a different surname. This was equivalent to selling the country of his ancestors. Even if one day he became strong again and took everything back, who knew how the history books would record this matter, and whether the future generations would scold him. But after hearing Lu De's words, the bad thing became a good thing. He didn't need to pay any price to solve the problem. He even made a strong enemy for Ming. Such a brilliant plan made him very satisfied. Now that Zhu Qizhen was satisfied, the ministers were free to leave. As Lu De walked among them, he could clearly see that the Minister of Revenue, Wang Zue, was looking at him with disdain. Yang Qindong had once saved Wang Zue's life on the battlefield. This was something that everyone knew. A while ago, Yang Qindong and Lu De had quarreled over the matter of Hangzhou's prefectural magistrate, Shinduki. This was something that everyone knew. Just from this aspect alone, the two of them already disliked each other. However, this was not the main problem. The main problem was that Lu De's words today were clearly plotting against Yang Qindong. Even though there were only a few important ministers present, today's conversation would definitely be recorded in the history books. Presumably, Zhu Qizhen would be the first to speak of this matter, so as to prevent the future generations from placing such a scheme on him. In this way, the matter of Lu De plotting against Yang Qindong would naturally be spread soon. At that time, given the personality of the Duke of Loyalty and Courage, would he forgive Lu De? This was why there was a trace of disdain in Wang Zuo's eyes when he looked at him. In his opinion, if he wanted to use Yang Qindong, he should use him well. He should use his emotions and reason with him. There was no need to worry that he would not do his best for the imperial court and the South Ming Empire. After all, from Wang Zuo's point of view, Yang Qindong was still a minister of the great Ming Empire. It was just a coincidence that he met the mercenaries. However, if he was plotted against like this, it would be a different story. The consequences would be very serious. Wang Zuo's gaze towards Lu De was somewhat complicated, even somewhat disdainful. However, there was also someone who looked at him with gratitude. That was the Minister of Personnel, Qin Sun. Just now, if Lu De had not spoken up in time, he would have either left a mark on the history books and be criticized by others, or he would have been hated by the emperor. He did not know what kind of end he would end up in. Lu De's words could be considered to have saved his life at a crucial time. Thank you, Brother Lu. Qin Sun clasped his hands gratefully. While he was speaking, the Minister of Justice, Xiao Chua, and the Minister of Works, Jiang Yuan, also walked over. Lu De knew how to conduct himself. Among the 6 ministers, he had united 3 of them. They were Qin Sun, Xiao Chua, and Jiang Yuan. Originally, he wanted to pull Imperial Censor Shang Lu into their camp. However, the position of Imperial Censor was too important. He had the responsibility of supervising hundreds of officials. Such a position meant that he could not participate in other people's camps. Otherwise, he would definitely be suspected by the emperor. He would not be far from being dismissed or even punished. In other words, among the 6 ministers, other than Minister Kuang Yi of the Ministry of War and Minister Wang Zuo of the Ministry of Revenue, the other 4 ministers had already formed a group. Coincidentally, these 4 ministers did not have any close relationship with Yang Qindong. On the contrary, because of Lu De, there was some estrangement between them. Everyone saw what happened just now. Xiao Chua and Jiang Yuan saw how Lu De spoke up to save Qin Sun at the crucial moment. They admired Lu De for being fearless and not caring about his reputation. Now they walked over to express their goodwill. Lu De naturally noticed the approach of these 2 people and immediately had a plan in mind. He chuckled and said, "Brother Qin, what are you talking about? We are originally one. It can be said that when one person's glory, everyone's glory. When one person's loss, everyone's loss. This is what I should do." Good, well said. Xiao Chua and Jiang Yuan could not help but nod to express their appreciation. Because of this, the friendship between the 4 of them seemed to have become even closer. It was obvious that with them around, Yang Qindong's wish to be conferred the title of king would be very difficult. The mercenary camp outside Gaozhou Prefecture City. It had been 5 days since Miao Jun passed through here. At noon on this day, the scouts from Lung Feng reported that the 10,000 Miao soldiers had returned. They would most likely pass by Lung Feng's camp in the evening. When the news spread, many people in Lung Feng's camp were eager to show off their skills. Now they only hoped that Miao Jun would impulsively attack the mercenaries and give them a chance to show off. Just as Yang Qindong expected, General Zhang Tseng, who led the team on the way back, had been considering whether to attack the mercenaries or not. Originally, they had vowed to attack Lijiu Prefecture City, wanting to break through and achieve great merit. However, he never thought that when he really went there, he would see an empty city. Not only that, they did not see anything valuable in the city. This meant that they had returned without achieving anything. This made Zhang Tseng, who had finally managed to get this job, feel depressed. Since the day of Miao Jun's uprising, he had been sweeping away everything in his path as if he had entered a no-man's land. Whenever he encountered an enemy, it was like the autumn wind sweeping away the fallen leaves. When had there ever been a time like this where he had mobilized so many people, yet there was not even the slightest bit of gain? If they went back like this, they would probably be laughed at by their colleagues. No, we definitely cannot go back like this, Zhang Tsing said in his heart. However, if he wanted to return with great merit, it seemed that he could only choose to attack the mercenaries. Scholar Zhou's words cannot be completely trusted. He is originally a Han Chinese, a citizen of the great Ming dynasty. Who knows what he is thinking? Before he decided to take action, Zhang Tseng convinced himself in his heart. Then he sent out scouts to check on the situation of the mercenary camp with the excuse of going back to report the news. Zhang Tseng was quite careful, at least he knew to observe the situation before taking action. Thus, the scouts he sent out openly passed by the mercenaries' camp and headed towards the Miao army's main camp in Gaozhou Prefecture City. Originally, the defense of Lung Feng's camp had always been very strict. Usually one could see squads of soldiers patrolling back and forth. However, ever since they used the night to plant mines outside the camp, they naturally relaxed a lot. This time, in order to lure the enemy to attack, they purposely relaxed on the outside but tightened on the inside. Wherever outsiders could see, the soldiers would appear very lazy. However, in the depths of the camp where no one could see, the training was still very strict. In this way, the Miao army scouts who seemed to be passing by but were actually investigating the situation fell for the trap and reported the mercenaries' performance to Zhang Tseng. Hearing that the mercenaries were so careless, Zhang Tseng was overjoyed. He felt that this was a great opportunity given to him by the heavens. He immediately sent his trusted aide to the Miao army's main camp and reported that he wanted to take advantage of the situation to attack the mercenaries. He also listed out his reason, which was that the mercenaries were too careless and this was the perfect time to take them down. The trusted aide quickly passed by the mercenaries' camp again. After observing for a while and confirming that the scout's report was correct, he went to the Miao army's main camp and met with King Miao Jinlong. He then told him of his general's plan. Attack the mercenaries' camp? Hearing the report, Miao Jinlong, who was originally sitting at the head of the table, was suddenly energized. However, when he repeated this sentence, he did not forget to look at Scholar Zhou, the most cultured person in the camp. Zoda was originally listening attentively. It must be said that he was indeed smart. When he heard the scout report that General Zhang Tseng had led the troops to Laizhou Prefecture without any success, he had already predicted that the journey back would not be peaceful. Now that he heard the trusted aide that Zhang Tseng sent back say this, he sighed in his heart. Zoda would not believe what the scout said about the mercenaries' camp being lax and the soldiers slacking off without any morale. Chapter 434. Since they were able to wipe out the Huang bandit army, which was a huge headache for the southern Ming Empire, how could such an army be as weak as described? If that was the case, it could only prove that the other party had ulterior motives. Or rather, they were just putting on an act and waiting for others to attack. Although Zoda had these thoughts in his mind, he did not intend to argue. The strength of the mercenary army was not something that he could rely on. Perhaps it was only when he was rebuffed and suffered losses that others would believe his words. As the saying goes, a fall into the pit, a gain in your wit. Therefore, when Miao Jinlong looked at him, he did not object firmly and only expressed his opinion. My king, the mercenary army should not be as weak as they appear to be. I'm afraid there's a trap. A trap? The news said that they only have 7,000 people. General Zhang Tseng's army has 10,000 people. Including us, we have 80,000 people. So what if there's a trap? Miao Jinlong saw that Zoda's attitude was still calm and tried to persuade him. Zoda only expressed his opinion and said what he thought. Since others did not believe him, there was nothing he could do. He did not say anything and looked as though he would not change his opinion. Therefore, when faced with Miao Jinlong's second question, he did not say anything. Since even Zoda did not say anything, Miao Jinlong felt that his idea of sneaking into the camp was a good one. After all, if they could take down the mercenary army in one battle, Gaozhou Prefecture would be broken through. He would have made a great contribution along the way and would be able to reach the Guangzhou Prefecture. From there, he would be able to control and occupy the entire Guangdong Prefecture. With an idea in mind and no one standing out to object, Miao Jinlong immediately waved his hand and said to the personal guard sent by Zhang Zheng, "Tell your general to choose to attack the mercenaries tonight. This king will send troops to support you. At the same time, I will also send troops to keep an eye on Gaozhou Prefecture so that they won't be able to come out to help." Yang Chendong was still chatting with First Madam Hu Yen and Third Madam Snow Lady in the tent. To him, chatting with his wives was the best way to relax. Report. Tiger's Mane's voice came from outside the tent. Come in. Yang Chendong straightened his body. He knew that something must have happened. Otherwise, Tiger's Mane wouldn't have come to disturb him at this time. Yang Chendong's guess was right. Tiger's Mane had indeed come to inform him of the changes in Miao Jun's troops. Young master, the 10,000 Miao soldiers who were returning to their camp have suddenly slowed down their speed. I've asked someone to calculate it. Based on their current speed, it's very likely that they'll reach our camp after midnight. Slow down? Yang Chendong couldn't help but chuckle when he heard this sudden change that could also be said to be a logical change. That day, Yang Chendong saw the Miao army walk past his camp in an extremely arrogant manner. He thought that this army was too proud and arrogant, and it was very likely that there would be people who were not content and would be like a snake trying to swallow an elephant. Thus, he ordered the scouts to keep a close eye on them. At the same time, the camp was prepared to take precautions. However, all of this was just a guess, a feeling, or an inference based on experience. It couldn't be considered as the truth. However, with this information from Tiger's Mane, it was completely different. As everyone knew, once an army that had left the camp was on the way back, the soldiers would be anxious to return home. Their speed would only be faster and not slower. Just like these 10,000 Miao soldiers, their desire to return to their camp should be very strong. Thus their speed should be very fast. Not to mention that they should have reached their camp before dinner. Even if they were a little later, their speed should have been faster. How could they suddenly be pushed back and only arrive at his camp in the middle of the night? If that was really the case, wouldn't it be better for them to have a good night's rest and return to camp early the next morning? Just from this point alone, it was obvious that the other party's intentions were clear. How's the Miao army's camp? Yang Qindong asked out of caution. Reporting to young master, the scouts monitoring there reported that nothing unexpected happened. Everything seems to be normal. Tiger's Mane replied truthfully. Everything is normal? That's the most abnormal thing. Think about it, if the army is really returning to camp, wouldn't the camp need to make some preparations? Seeing that the enemy is near, it's very reasonable for them to send out troops to welcome them. However, they didn't do anything which exposed their intentions. Yang Qindong gave a very certain answer after analyzing the situation. Originally, Tiger's Mane didn't understand why normal was abnormal. However, after listening to Yang Qindong's analysis, he couldn't help but sigh in his heart. Young master was indeed the young master. He had talked about this before in the strategy class, but why didn't he think of this immediately? Well, if that's the case, the Miao army will definitely come tonight if nothing unexpected happens. They won't come late at night, but a little earlier. Since that's the case, we'll just prepare our pockets and wait for them to come. There's no reason for us not to eat this fat meat that's already in our mouth. Yang Qindong had a confident smile on his face. Seeing this scene, Hu Yen and Madame Shui's eyes twinkled like stars. Which girl didn't love heroes? Not to mention people like Yang Qindong who had such a family business at such a young age. Even though they were already his wives, this still couldn't stop them from releasing their love for him. In fact, during this period of time, Hu Yen and Lady Shui had felt something. Why would these elite soldiers listen to her husband's words so obediently? Although they had heard the story of Yang Qindong saving the mercenary leader, they absolutely didn't believe it in their hearts. However, it didn't seem right to say that these people were their husband's soldiers. How old was Yang Qindong? How could he have the time to manage and create all this? Yang Qindong had already noticed this doubt, but he didn't say anything. Firstly, it wasn't the time to say everything. Secondly, he didn't want the two girls to worry. It was better to let them guess as they were now, and it would be easier for him to feel at ease. The 10,000 Miao army, after General Zhang Tseng's order, began to slow down their return journey. Those who were able to come out to attack the city naturally had good combat strength. In terms of overall strength, they were the elites of the 80,000 Miao army. It was precisely because of this that Zhang Tseng passed down the order in advance. That was, they could slow down and wait for the right time to directly rush into the mercenary camp, which only had 7,000 people, and take over the camp. 10,000 against 7,000, they had a big advantage in terms of military strength. In addition, they didn't encounter any decent resistance along the way. Over time, the arrogance of these soldiers could be imagined. Therefore, even if they were facing the mercenaries, the ignorant were fearless and they had no fear at all. On the contrary, they thought that it was just a simple attack, and by sneaking into the camp, they were afraid that the situation would be decided with a single attack. As Yang Qindong thought, Zhang Tseng didn't choose to attack the camp in the middle of the night. Although late at night was the time when a person was in deep sleep, it was also the time when one's defense was the weakest. However, Zhang Tseng knew that as long as the mercenary general was not an idiot, he would definitely send someone to secretly observe him. In this way, he would also calculate when he would arrive at the enemy's camp. Since that was the case, how could he not be prepared at all? However, there was no need to be afraid as long as he was prepared. Zhang Tseng originally wanted to play the element of surprise. He would wait for the sky to turn dark and suddenly attack the camp. Such a sudden decision would definitely catch these mercenaries off guard. Zhang Tseng's plan was very good. However, he didn't know that Yang Qindong had already made preparations. More importantly, he didn't need to put up a strict defense. With the mines placed 500 meters away from the camp, victory was already in his grasp. It was precisely because of these weapons of mass destruction that others did not know or understand that the mercenary camp looked so lazy from the outside. That was why those Miao scouts who were spying on this place believed that this was indeed an unguarded camp. Not to mention other things, with the eyes of these scouts, even if you were tight on the inside and relaxed on the outside, they would still be able to see the general situation. At least, when they charged, it shouldn't be a problem for them to kill their way out of the camp. Naturally, the Miao army had heard that the mercenaries had advanced firearms before, but they weren't too afraid. They had seen the firearms of the great Ming dynasty before. As long as they could get close and change to close combat, it would be difficult for any firearms to play their role. If they were able to get their hands on some firearms, then they would have profited greatly. The news from the scouts made Jiang Tseng overjoyed. At the same time, he was even more determined to sneak into the camp at night. For this, he had already made preparations. He called all the small leaders who could lead more than 500 people in front of him. Everyone, remember, when you charge in, you must be fast and fierce enough. Don't let the enemy have any time to prepare. I don't mind telling you that there was news that when these mercenaries destroyed the Huang bandits, they obtained a lot of gold and silver. When the time comes, whoever gets the most of these things will naturally get more in the end. Do you understand? Jiang Tseng was afraid that the soldiers below wouldn't use their full strength, so he said this in a misleading manner. However, he didn't know that the faster they charged in, the faster they would die, and the more they charged in, the more they would die. The small leaders below were relatively uninformed. They had almost never heard of Yang Qindong's mercenaries. They only knew that there were a lot of treasures waving at them, and that was enough. Although they had to hand over a certain percentage of the treasures they snatched, wouldn't it mean that the more they snatched, the more they would be able to keep? Although most of them hadn't read books, they still had some understanding of this. After a round of pre-battle mobilization, the entire Miao army of more than 10,000 people became excited. In their eyes, it was as if victory already belonged to them. The only difference was that they could snatch more and gain more. Chapter 435. Gaozhou Prefecture. Kuang Yi, Guanyin, Ma Wei, and Yu Guang were standing below the tall city gate tower, looking into the distance. Is the news accurate? The Miao army really slowed down? Kuang Yi stood in the middle of the crowd and said solemnly. The Miao army was already at the city gates, but they didn't attack immediately. Instead, they circled around the city and made a trip to Laizhou Prefecture. This way, it seemed like Gaozhou Prefecture was temporarily safe, but Kuang Yi was very clear that the Miao army didn't find trouble with them because they were afraid of the mercenaries below the city gates. It should be because Yang Qindong's reputation as the god of war had spread, which made the other party wary. They didn't act rashly because they wanted to play it safe. As a result, Kuang Yi couldn't help but sigh. There were indeed smart people everywhere. Originally, he was still hoping that Miao Jun would take the initiative to provoke the mercenaries and then lead to a battle to the death. This way he wouldn't have to spend so much effort to ask Yang Qindong to send troops. His hopes were dashed, and Kuang Yi could only wait for news from the imperial court. It could be said that at the beginning, Kuang Yi was shocked when he heard that Yang Qindong was also interested in being conferred the title of king. He even thought that this request was too high and impossible to fulfill. However, as the days passed, his thoughts changed. Shiping King Mu Bin could be conferred the title of king, so why couldn't Yang Qindong? Speaking of contributions, just based on the fact that Yang Qindong had saved Ding Zong's life on the battlefield, no one could compare to him. It was just a pity that the emperor's heavenly might was unpredictable. Perhaps he was used to being high and mighty, thinking that everyone should do anything for him. On the contrary, it made them slowly forget what gratitude was, and what it meant to repay kindness. Regardless, after Kuang Yi calmed down, he thought that Yang Qindong could still be conferred the title of king. Not for any other reason but because the southern Ming Empire had no other choice. Since this was the case, why not confer the title of king to someone with a different surname to solve the crisis in front of them? Not to mention that Yang Qindong's health seemed to be very poor. If that was the case, then it was not a big deal to crown a half-dead person as king. The obstacles should be much smaller. Just like that, she waited for the emperor's imperial edict before going to Yang Qindong to talk. Unexpectedly, a scout came to report that the 10,000 Miao soldiers who went to the Laizhou prefecture had returned. Not only that, but they slowed down as they approached. Who was Kuang Yi? To be able to become the minister of war, even if he did not participate in the war during peacetime and had never been on the battlefield, he should at least be someone who knew how to fight. Miao Jun's abnormal actions quickly attracted his attention. He immediately called for Guanyin, Ma Wei, Yu Guang and the other generals. After a short discussion, they came to the conclusion that Miao Jun would most likely make a move tonight. Yes, master. We have already investigated and it is indeed so. They must have their own motives for doing this, but we cannot confirm if they want to make a move against the mercenaries or us. Guan Ying stood up and reported the results of his investigation with Ma Wei and Yu Guang. There is no need to confirm, they must be making a move against the mercenaries. Kuang Yi was very confident. They were in the city, and attacking the city at night would be much more difficult than attacking in the day. Of course, he would also take some precautions. For example, if there were spies in the city, it was not impossible to open the city gates at night and lure the enemy into the city. How about this? The three generals will work hard tonight. Keep a close eye on the four cities and tell the soldiers below that without this old man's orders, even the three of you have no authority to open the city gates. Kuang Ye's voice was firm and powerful. Only by taking the authority into his own hands could he ensure that the city gates were not lost. As for whether his actions and suspicions would disappoint his subordinates, he couldn't care less at this critical time. Fortunately, it was only for one night. In addition, he was the Minister of War and the current Grand Tutor of the Crown Prince. His official rank was much higher than these people, so he still had some authority. As expected, when Kuang Yi said this, Guan Ying was slightly better, but Ma Wei and Yu Guang's expressions were somewhat unnatural. However, once they considered Kuang Ye's identity, even if the two of them were to have their authority taken away, they could only pinch their noses and nod in agreement. Master, since you can see that these Miao soldiers want to make a move against the mercenaries, shouldn't you send someone to remind the Duke of loyalty? Although they did not agree to send troops to deal with the bandits, they are still our allies. Guan Ying saw Kuang Ye's affirmation and thought about whether he should take the opportunity to express goodwill. Yes, I can send someone there to inform them. However, this old man thinks that the Duke of Loyalty has already seen through it. If he doesn't even have this little ability, how could the Huang bandits be destroyed so quickly? When Kuang Yi said this, his originally serious old face had a slight smile. However, he only wanted to send someone to inform Yang Qindong. As for sending reinforcements, it was better to forget about it. After all, he did not have much military strength in his hands. Moreover, the situation was unclear. If they opened the city gates in the middle of the night, who knew what kind of accident would happen? The sun had already set and the sky was beginning to turn dark. At this time, the people on both sides seemed to be waiting for the sky to turn darker so that they could fulfill some people's desire to kill in the dark and windy night. Susher. It was equivalent to 8 o'clock in the evening. The Miao army that was originally moving slowly began to speed up. With the sudden increase in speed, they could reach the mercenaries' barracks in half an hour and sneak into the camp. In other words, the time they decided to attack was Haishur, which was between 9 o'clock in the evening and 11 o'clock in the evening. This period of time was not the best time to sneak into the camp. This was because most people were not asleep, or those who were asleep were not in a deep sleep. Once something happened, they would be able to react immediately. However, after Zhang Tseng knew about this, he still did the opposite. This was where he thought he was smart. First, he slowed down the marching speed to make people think that it was late at night when they arrived at the mercenaries' barracks. This way they would make a wrong judgment. In order to ensure that they had enough energy at that time, if he was the leader, Zhang Tseng would arrange for the soldiers to sleep early and wake up before midnight. Considering that he would definitely do this, Zhang Tseng sent someone to observe the meal time of the mercenaries' barracks. As expected, the rising of the fireworks was earlier than usual. This was the signal to eat and sleep early. With this, Zhang Tseng was full of confidence. The plan was for you to prepare to set up defenses in the middle of the night. I won't go against your wishes and attack early. This way I can make use of the time difference. Thus, the sudden acceleration of the march at Haishur. Miao Jun, who had long been prepared and had even eaten in advance, began to move, running forward at an extremely fast speed. These people were abnormally excited, as if this time they were not going to war, but to obtain gold, silver, and treasures. With this kind of marching speed, the advantage was that even if they were discovered, they would not have enough time to prepare for defense. This was also the reason why General Zhang Tseng was so confident in giving the order to attack after knowing that the mercenaries' barracks did not specifically strengthen the defense. Under normal circumstances, such an unforeseen event would be discovered by the scouts first. Then the scouts would quickly pass the news back. After that, the general who received the news would arrange for the army to prepare for defense. All of this required time. During this time, if the two sides were far away, there would be enough time to prepare. However, when the distance was extremely close like now with less than an hour, it would be too rushed and even too late. In this way, the success rate of this kind of surprise attack was usually very high. With such a high probability occurrence and it was against the mercenaries, not only would the chances of victory decrease, it could also cause the battle to go in the other direction. That would be the failure of the ambush. This was what everyone called trying to steal a chicken only to end up losing the rice used to lure it. Not to mention the mines that were already buried outside the barracks that could allow people to fly into the air. Just inside the barracks alone, Yang Qindong had already given the order to rest and sleep when he knew that the Miao army would pass by the barracks. Thus, other than a few companies that had to be on duty, most of the soldiers had already entered a state of sleep. Just like what Tiger's man had said, the enemy might not really come in the middle of the night. In order to launch a surprise attack, it was very possible that they would come one step earlier. With regards to Tiger's man's analysis, Yang Qindong completely agreed and even felt gratified. A strong army or even a strong country in the future could not solely rely on himself. It needed everyone's hard work. Only when more loyal soldiers improved their abilities could they do great things together. Yang Qindong agreed with this analysis. Naturally, the Lung Feng soldiers only rested for half a day. They had already woken up at 7 o'clock in the evening and began to eat the warm meals that they had reheated earlier. They replenished their energy and prepared for the big battle. The entire barracks was quiet, but in fact, a monstrous murderous aura was forming. However, this kind of murderous aura could not be seen. It could only be felt when one was in the midst of it. It belonged to the kind of existence that could not be seen or touched. Not to mention the monstrous murderous aura, after the 10,000 Miao army rushed for nearly an hour, they could already vaguely see the mercenary barracks outside with torches. It was previously said that whichever army charged in first would be able to obtain more wealth. With such a military order, the army that had just arrived did not even have the time to regroup. Instead, they rushed straight to the front of the barracks like a swarm of bees. Everyone was doing their best at this moment, as if they were afraid that the benefits would not belong to them if they were a step late. Chapter 436. Looking from afar, the frenzied charge looked like waves on the beach. Wave after wave, there was no way to stop them. In the process of charging, battle cries rang out. The torches that were originally unlit lit up one after another. From afar, it looked like the sky was filled with countless stars. What was supposed to come had finally arrived. In the mercenary camp, all the cold vanguard auxiliary soldiers and temporary auxiliary soldiers began to gather at an amazing speed. They then took their equipment and weapons and began to gather at various locations according to the military orders they received. More than 7,000 people. Almost 7,000 people participated in this battle. Other than the two cold vanguard companies and the first and second teams of guards by Yang Qindong's side, the Wolf Fang Special Forces and the Ghost Sniper team had joined the battle. Obviously, Yang Qindong wanted to show the Miao army how powerful he was once and for all. He wanted them to be afraid of him from now on and not dare to do anything to him. Outside the camp, the battle cries were getting closer and closer. Not only in the south, even the Miao army headquarters in the northwest had sent 10,000 people to cooperate with the joint attack. With 20,000 against 7,000, the advantage was already very obvious. In addition, it was a sneak attack. No matter how one looked at it, there was no possibility of failure. Naturally, the 20,000 Miao army soldiers could see such a simple logic. Therefore, they attacked the mercenary camp with extra force. There was a saying that one would not die if one did not seek death. At this moment, it was the most suitable saying for the Miao army. The charging Miao army soldiers did not know how powerful the opponents they were facing this time were and what kind of training they had to go through. They also did not know that 500 meters away from the camp, there were advanced landmines that could kill them. They had never even heard of this before. Once they stepped on it, it could quickly send them to the sky. Even if they did not shatter into pieces, it was enough to take their lives. Even the people around them could be blown to death by the fireball. It was precisely because of their ignorance and their eagerness to perform meritorious deeds that when the 20,000 Miao soldiers charged over from two different directions like a tidal wave, most of them did not even realize that they were already on the verge of death. All of this was completely reflected in the following battle. When the earth-shattering Miao army or fake Miao army, the ordinary southern Ming people who had no food to eat along the way, arrived 500 meters away from the mercenary camp while shouting excitedly, they were so excited that they thought that the fruits of victory were right in front of them. Then the first flame lit up. The first landmine exploded. It was especially dazzling in the night. This flame was like a meteor from outer space. Suddenly, a dazzling light flashed. Then at least 3 or 4 figures rose into the air. Then more than a dozen figures were blasted to the ground. Yang Qindong provided them with some important books and some finished mines. The carefully selected craftsmen of the munitions factory had finally developed the first batch of mines. However, they did not get the essence of the mines. Although they used a lot of materials, the power was actually much weaker. At least, it was far from being comparable to the landmines in the future. However, all of this did not matter. Firstly, the lack of power could be made up with numbers. Secondly, the Miao army's charge this time was too concentrated. Everyone was basically following each other as they charged forward. Under such a formation, the lethality of the bombs was naturally very dazzling. It was not like the future where the emphasis was on long-range attacks. Even when it was necessary to send an army, it was often infiltrated by small groups of elites. Therefore, in the West where the battles were the most intense, it was considered very effective if a bomb could kill more than 3 people at the same time. It was far from comparable to now where a bomb could kill more than a dozen people at the same time. Boom. After the first fireball appeared, the second fireball appeared, then the third and the fourth fireball appeared. Countless balls of light burned, causing countless Miao army soldiers to either die or be heavily injured. When the number of balls of light increased, the number of cries and screams on the battlefield suddenly increased. There were 2 rows of almost 3 landmines. Yang Qindong considered that there were many Han civilians among them and did not want to kill too much. Otherwise, if he made them denser, there would be more fireballs and the lethality would be even greater. Clusters of flames lit up one after another. In the blink of an eye, the first row of landmines had all been passively detonated. Very quickly, the second row of landmines went off as well. Who knew how many people were lifted into the air in despair and died in horror and fear? Why did this happen? Since the first row of landmines had already been detonated and the 2 rows were 20 meters apart, why did the second row of landmines explode? Speaking of which, this was caused by the Miao army's desire for grandiose achievements. If the Miao army had not underestimated the mercenaries and relied on their numbers to attack in a dense formation, this would not have happened. It was because he knew that the mercenaries might have extremely advanced firearms that General Zhang Zeng decided to attack in such a way. In this way, if they were to encounter firearms from afar, they would not be able to kill many with such a dense formation. This allowed them to charge all the way until they entered the camp and engaged in close combat. The scales of victory would naturally tilt towards them. It could not be denied that this might be a way to break through the firearms formation. It was just like when the great Ming dynasty was at its peak. When Zhu Di went out to the grasslands, the firearms team he led had encountered such an attack. For this reason, there were indeed many casualties and they had paid a great price. Even when Duke Ying Jianghu had invaded Jiaoji, his firearms unit had also suffered a heavy blow from the Jiaoji army's counterattack. With the experience of his predecessors, the Miao army chose to use this method to break through the firearms formation. However, he did not expect to suffer such a huge loss. It could be said that this was due to the lack of information. If one had carefully studied the firearms of the mercenaries, they would know that the reason why they were called the new model was because their firearms could fire continuously. Compared to the great Ming dynasty's flintlocks, which needed to be loaded with gunpowder to fire a shot, this machine gun was much more advanced. Even if there were no landmines with a few powerful machine guns placed here, the effect would still be surprisingly good. There was a saying in the later generations that whoever grasped the information would be one step closer to victory. This saying was also applicable in ancient wars. If one did not even know the details of the opponent and charged rashly, the result of failure was already destined. Without enough attention, an earth-shattering formation would only result in more casualties. When the first ball of fire lit up, the Miao army who was charging at the front wanted to stop. After all, the visual impact of that thing was too strong. However, they were at the very front. If they wanted to stop, they would have to ask for the permission of the brothers behind them. Therefore, before they could do anything, a huge force came from behind them, pushing the Miao Jun in front of them forward. Boom, boom, boom. As the explosions continued, the Miao army in the middle finally felt that something was wrong. However, how could they stop when they were charging at such a high speed? Just like that, they pushed their brothers at the front another 20 meters until the second row of mines was triggered. Only then did the army stop charging forward. However, it was also at this time that the Miao army at the back also rushed forward without hesitation, not knowing what was going on. Very good, the second wave of landmines has been triggered. Inform all the warriors that there is no need to follow the previous direction. There are no more landmines in front of us. Everyone charge. Luo Pe, the commander of the 2nd Cold Vanguard Regiment, who was appointed to be in charge of this battle, used a telescope with night vision to observe the situation on the battlefield. What followed was his excited shouts, followed by the loud sound of the bugle call. A squad of 10 warriors blasted the bugle call. The sound spread out and could be heard clearly on the battlefield. When the bugle call sounded, it meant that the entire army was charging. The moment they heard the bugle call, 7,000 Yang family soldiers rushed out like ferocious tigers with weapons in their hands. It was the same charge, but the Yang army's formation was much more orderly. The first echelon held bows that could shoot up to 100 meters away. Each person had 10 arrows. One could imagine the consequences of throwing the arrows into the air. Each person also had crossbow arrows that could penetrate anything at close range. When they reached a certain distance, it was time for them to show their power. The second echelon held shields and short swords. They could both defend and attack. The third echelon was also the main force of the charge. The steel swords and spears were like a sharp knife that pierced into the enemy's heart. The fourth echelon was mainly used for battlefield rescue. Some of them were carrying a stretcher in pairs, some were holding ropes to tie the captives, and some were holding loudspeakers that could be used for propaganda purposes. Under the protection of 100 fully armed elite cold front soldiers who were armed with the Type 95, they walked at the back and did the finishing work. The few echelons advanced in an orderly manner. No matter how fierce the battle was, their footsteps were firm. They were like a human tank, rapidly advancing forward. On Miao Juanzhong's side, more than half of the front line was destroyed. Even the middle line was heavily damaged. It was at this moment that the rear line rushed over and collided with the retreating front line and middle line. Get out of the way, retreat. Get out of the way, you cowards. Why are you retreating? Get out of the way, let us charge forward. Idiot, don't you see the fire god showing his power? Why aren't you turning back? Chaos before the battle. This was Miao Juanzhong's performance. The powerful landmines made these uneducated soldiers who did not understand science think that the fire god was showing his power. They were all scared out of their wits. How could they still have the will to fight? Chapter 437. Both sides were still pushing and shoving each other, not giving way to each other. Suddenly, arrows fell from the back and landed among the Miao soldiers who were confronting each other. At that moment, many of them were shot and fell to the ground. Where are our archers? Fight back. Seeing the arrows falling from the sky, Zhang Tseng, who was commanding the battle at the back, shouted loudly. Following his shout, some scattered archers also started to fight back. The arrows hit the shields of the Yang family army's second echelon. Other than the sound of impact, there was almost no damage done. After the weak counterattack of the Miao army, the first echelon of the Yang family army took out their crossbows and started to fight back. At a close distance, an arrow was shot and it was accompanied by the fall of one of the opponents or the scream of another person. The third echelon also took this opportunity to quickly catch up. Then the swords and spears were swung wildly. How could the frightened Miao army resist? Zhang Tseng was still sitting on his horse and wanted to give orders, but an arrow came out of nowhere and landed on his left shoulder, causing him to cry out in pain. General, the general is injured, quick. The general is injured, protect the general and retreat. The dozens of bodyguards saw that their leader who was being protected was also shot and shouted to go forward. Then they pulled him down from the horse and supported him to retreat to the back. Even the bodyguards could see that the front was losing, and even losing, how could Zhang Tseng not see it? Taking this opportunity, he pretended to be deaf and mute. He did not say anything and let everyone support him to retreat to the back. Those who kneel and surrender can live, otherwise die. The shout from the loudspeaker sounded like it was beside the ears of the chaotic Miao army. That shout stunned many people and they stood still, not knowing what to do. Da-da-da. Da-da-da. The fourth echelon of the Yang family army had also arrived. Lian Lungfeng, who was holding the 95 style, finally pulled the trigger. What followed was the scene of people falling to the ground one after another. This sudden gunshot was the last straw that suppressed the chaotic Miao army. The situation of the battlefield was also settled at this moment. The Miao family only had two choices, to retreat or to surrender. Run. Some of the faster Miao Jun soldiers who were at the back immediately turned and ran. Some of the Miao soldiers who wanted to run but were surrounded in the middle were not so lucky. When mercenaries began to appear around them, these people seemed to have only one choice left, which was to kneel down and surrender. The sound of gunfire continued, and the sound of cold weapons clashing could be heard from time to time. However, it was clear that the commotion was getting smaller and smaller. The battle had not even officially started, but it was already heading towards the end. In the Miao army's main camp, Although King Miao Jinlong was still sitting at the head of the tent, his expression was obviously not as calm as before. The moment he heard the explosions, he had a bad feeling in his heart. It was just that he didn't want to admit it until he received the battle report from the front line. Reporting. The tent's curtains were pulled open from the outside, and the scout general who rushed in knelt on the ground with a thud. Reporting to your majesty, our army has been ambushed by the enemy and is retreating in defeat. Ambush? What kind of ambush? Aren't the mercenaries resting and sleeping? Miao Jinlong suddenly stood up from his chair, staring with a pair of red eyes as he spoke in a cold voice. We still need to find out the details, but the fact that the army is retreating is a fact. Please end it quickly, your majesty. The scout general did not know how to explain what he had seen. He only remembered that the moment the fire flashed, his eyes seemed to have gone blurry. Then not long after he saw the Miao army frantically retreating. If you can't find out, what's the use of having you? Hearing his subordinate's reply, Miao Jinlong was furious. Although he had already felt that something was wrong when the answer came out, he realized that he could not take it anymore. Miao Jinlong was so angry that he lost his composure. Fortunately, Scholar Zoda's mind was not messed up. After all, this was the outcome that he had expected. However, his words carried little weight and he could not stop it. In addition, he also wanted Zhang Tseng to suffer a great loss, so that he would not continue to be so arrogant in the future. Now that he saw that the front line had indeed lost, he stepped out from the ranks and said to Miao Jinlong, Your Majesty, since the front line has lost, you should immediately send a general to receive them and reduce the losses. At the same time, close the camp gates and prepare for defense. This is the safest way. When Miao Jinlong heard Zoda's words, he was like a drowning man who had grabbed onto a piece of dead wood, nodding his head like a chick pecking at rice. Not bad, not bad. Go and prepare according to what Scholar Zo said. This was the strategy that they had discussed before. After all, planning for defeat before planning for victory was also the art of war. Of course, these suggestions were put forward by Zoda. It was also under his persuasion that the Miao army only sent out 20,000 men this time. Otherwise, they might have sent out even more people, and naturally, the losses would be even greater. With Miao Jinlong's orders, the Miao army camp quickly moved. Those who were supposed to save people went to save people, and those who were supposed to defend the camp tightened their defense. At least they did not lose their composure during the chaos. More importantly, Kuang Yi, who was originally looking for an opportunity to send out troops, could not find a suitable opportunity. Kuang Yi could see that the Miao army wanted to attack the camp. It was because of this that he thought of what he should do. For example, if the mercenaries lost, they would have to defend the city gates. On the other hand, if the mercenaries won, could he also take the initiative to attack? For example, he could directly attack the Miao army camp and capture or kill Miao Jinlong. Between the two options, he also made preparations for the second option. With his understanding of the mercenaries, of course, he thought that Yang Qindong had a higher chance of winning this battle. The reality was as such. After a series of explosions and sparks, the Miao army lost. As such, Kuang Yi urgently sent people out of the city to watch every movement of the Miao army camp. At the same time, other than leaving a portion of the troops to Guanyin to defend the city, General Ma Wei and General Yu Guang were gathered by him to prepare 1,000 soldiers to attack the camp. Unfortunately, the number of troops was still too little. After receiving the news that the Miao army camp was not in chaos, and that the defense was orderly, Kuang Yi could only give up on the idea of military action with a face of disappointment. Firstly, his troops were too little. Using 1,000 to attack the enemy's camp of 60,000 was no different from seeking death. Secondly, he did not inform Yang Qindong in advance. If he rashly attacked without any support, it was very likely that he would not be able to return. Kuang Yi stopped all military operations and only sent out scouts to investigate the situation outside. He still had a glimmer of hope, and that was whether the mercenaries would take the opportunity to attack the Miao army's main camp. If that was the case, he would definitely intervene. To Kuang Ye's disappointment, the mercenaries did not intend to attack the Miao army camp. They only rushed out for 2 miles before stopping. Following that, they turned back to clean up the spoils of war. Groups of captives were tied up with ropes and brought back to the mercenaries' camp. Piles of fire were set ablaze, directly igniting the corpses of the dead Miao army soldiers. This was not to destroy the corpses, but to prevent any plague from spreading after so many people died. Zhang Tseng still managed to escape, along with 8,000 Miao army soldiers. When they retreated back to the Miao army camp in shock, their legs seemed to be filled with lead, and they could not move a single step. Just like that, they sat on the ground with a plop. The soldiers could act like a bear, but as a general, Zhang Tsung could not. He scrambled into the main tent and knelt in front of Miao Jinlong, begging for punishment. Looking at Zhang Tseng, who still had an injury on his left shoulder, although Miao Jinlong was filled with hatred, he did not punish him too much. This was a general who started the war with him, a meritorious subject and the purest of the Miao people. Thus, after reprimanding him, he let him go to recuperate. Regarding Miao Jinlong's nostalgia, Zoda, who was watching from the side, admired and hated him at the same time. He admired a master who was loyal, and that was the goal he should follow closely. If he followed such a person, at least he would not have to worry about being heartlessly abandoned. What he hated was that he placed too much emphasis on relationships, and that it would be difficult for him to achieve great things. Zoda was still analyzing Miao Jinlong's character and his strengths and weaknesses when one of the kings of the Miao tribe spoke to him. "Mr. Zhou, this time our Miao army has suffered a great loss. In your opinion, what should we do next?" King Zoda quickly retracted his wandering thoughts and changed to a very serious expression. "After tonight's incident, we have already seen the strength of the mercenaries, and they are indeed very strong. It is better not to go head-to-head with such an opponent. Otherwise, it will hurt the king's foundation. It is better to focus on defense first, then report this matter and let King Min handle everything." "Are we going to admit this loss just like that?" Miao Jinlong asked with a trace of unwillingness. "Of course we can't just admit it like that. However, if we do our best to fight the mercenaries and cause both sides to suffer losses, I am afraid that we will fall into the hands of some people. It is not a good thing to injure 1,000 of the enemy and 800 of our own. It is better to deal with all changes by sticking to the status quo, and look for opportunities to plan slowly." How could Zoda not see that this was Miao Jinlong's performance? He clearly saw the power of the mercenaries and did not want to be enemies with them, but he was worried that others would say that he was a coward. Since that was the case, he would help him find an excuse and find a way out. Zoda had lived in the Miao tribe for so many years, and he indeed understood the situation well enough. Just this sentence alone was enough to see through Miao Jinlong's thoughts. At the same time, he could not help but nod his head, and his originally cold expression eased a lot. Chapter 438. He was not the only king in the Miao tribe. Just this time, there were 3 powerful armies that followed the king of Min's army. They were Yang Wenba, the head of the Miao tribe in Dumeng village, Wu Yingtu, and himself. Speaking of which, the strength of these 2 groups was not weak. If he were to be heavily injured and let them know, they would probably rejoice in his misfortune. He would definitely not do something that would hurt his loved ones and make his enemies happy. Okay, Scholar Zhou is right. Since that is the case, immediately give the order to lock down the camp gate. Soldiers are not allowed to enter or leave without orders. At the same time, report this matter to the king of Min and ask for support. Originally, Miao Jinlong just wanted to find a way out. Now that the excuse had appeared, Miao Jinlong used it as an excuse. After this order was given, the camp with less than 70,000 Miao soldiers quickly quietened down. Regardless of whether it was the mercenaries or the South Ming army, they were all waiting for Miao Jun's reaction. From their point of view, it was normal for Miao Jun, who had suffered a loss, to calm down. However, it was also normal for him to retaliate crazily in anger. But no matter what it was, they wouldn't back down. They would deal with it as it came. Of course, if they had a choice, it was better not to use their weapons. After all, from a certain point of view, Miao Jun was only the auxiliary force of the king of Min's army. Even if they were eliminated, it would not be of much use. Instead, it would attract the king of Min's army to surround and attack them. Of course, unless they had enough power to fight them head-on. That would be a completely different attitude and thinking. They closely observed Miao Jun's movements. When the sun rose, Miao Jun suddenly quietened down. This was both reasonable and unexpected. But no matter what, now that they were quiet, everyone was temporarily safe. Kuang Yi, who stood on the top floor of Gaozhou's capital city, finally heaved a sigh of relief. Actually, he had a worry that he did not say out loud. That was, Miao Jun saw that the mercenaries were powerful and could not be provoked. Would he attack them in anger? So, they had to be on guard. Teacher, the sun is up. Miao Jun will not attack the city again. You have also stayed here for a night. Go back and have a good rest. Looking at Kuang Yi, who was over 60 years old, Guaning, as a student, said with a heartache. Hee. There was a smile on Kuang Ye's lips. Although he had stayed up all night, he did not seem to be in low spirits. Instead he turned to Guanyin and said, "You see, this is the strength of the mercenaries. They had nearly 3 times the number of people and they used a night attack, yet they still did not gain the slightest advantage. Tell me, why is the court not willing to put such a good general in an important position?" "Teacher, His Majesty must have his own considerations. You should go and rest first." How could Guanyin not know the meaning behind Kuang Ye's words? In fact, when he first heard that Yang Qindong also wanted the title of king with a different surname, he was also very angry. In his view, this was not a display of loyalty at all. But after thinking about it, Yang Qindong wasn't completely someone from the southern Ming Empire. If it wasn't for the emperor's invitation, he wouldn't even care about the chaos in Guangdong. Now that the chaos in Guangdong had been resolved, if they wanted them to resolve the chaos in Yunnan, how could they not pay a price? If he was Yang Qindong, he would probably also make some requests, even some excessive ones. This was because looking at a problem from a different perspective would lead to different results. For example, if 2 people were looking at the same palm, you would look at the palm, and the other would look at the back of the hand, their feelings would naturally be different. There was no such thing as absolute right or wrong. Although Guanyin knew that Yang Qindong's request was somewhat excessive, even demanding an exorbitant price, but looking at the current situation, it seemed that other than him, it would be very difficult for others to turn the situation around in a short period of time. It seemed that there was already a king with a different surname. Yang Qindong's request for one also didn't seem to be too excessive. Let's not talk about how Guanyin looked at Yang Qindong first. Let's talk about how when he helped his teacher Kuang Yi down the tower to rest, the 6th young master was not idle at all in his own camp. The battle had already ended, and under the efficient operation of the Yang family army, the cleaning of the battlefield was also nearing completion. The battle statistics were also reported under the cooperation of the regiment political commissar, the battalion instructor, and the battalion instructor. Right now it was placed on the table in front of him. Last night's battle was a battle with preparation, which was why they achieved such a glorious result. On the battlefield they killed more than 5,000 enemies, captured nearly 7,000, and only about 8,000 escaped. To be able to achieve such a result with 7,000 soldiers on the battlefield, it was indeed very gratifying, and could be considered a great victory. But when he saw the losses on the Yang family army's side, Yang Qindong still couldn't feel happy. Not for other reasons but because it was written that 3 of the Cold Front Army soldiers were injured, 2 of the auxiliary soldiers were heavily injured, and 20 of the auxiliary soldiers were injured. 60 of the auxiliary soldiers were killed, 30 of them were heavily injured, and 300 of them were lightly injured. When the loss of nearly 100 people and more than 300 injured people was reported to Yang Qindong, his face sank unconsciously. This was a battle with preparation, especially when the mines were absolutely effective, but they still paid such a huge price. This made Yang Qindong realize that using cold weapons against cold weapons wasn't very reliable. In the past, the Yang family army could be said to have won every battle. Even when they faced the 100,000 Huang bandit army, they didn't suffer such great losses. All of this was because of the superiority of their weapons. This time, Yang Qindong intended to remove the new guns, wanting to see the effects of cold weapons, but the results were obviously not very satisfactory. Perhaps some people said that under the same cold weapons, they defeated 20,000 enemies with less than 400 casualties, and captured 7,000. No matter how one looked at it, it was a victory. This saying couldn't be said to be wrong, but at least it didn't apply to the Yang family army. What kind of people were the Yang family army, and what kind of training did they undergo? Not to mention the elite Cold Front Army and the auxiliary soldiers, even the auxiliary soldiers had undergone strict training. Quite a few of them had performed well in the forest battle exercise a while ago. But now, some of them had died on the battlefield and there was nothing left. After such a great sacrifice, the soldiers had died before they even reached the real battlefield. How could anyone be happy? China's history had already proven that they preferred to be kind like water, which meant that they didn't rush things. They were used to slowly changing others and stabilizing their own power. This was also the main reason why most of the founding emperors weren't young. Logically speaking, with Yang Qindong's age and the current situation, if he performed well and was conferred the title of king, it wasn't impossible for him to spy on the entire great Ming dynasty. On the contrary, he had a high chance of success, and it wasn't impossible for him to become the founding emperor of a generation. However, this method of boiling the frog in warm water wasn't what Yang Qindong wanted. He, who was familiar with history, knew very well what would happen in the future. He also knew that in a few years, the backbone of the Han people would be broken by a few 100,000 people. Then they would rule for hundreds of years until the unforgettable 1840, when the backbone of the Qing dynasty was broken. That was more than 100 years of humiliation for the Han people. Even if great people appeared later on, it was extremely difficult to restore the prosperity of the past. The world structure had already been formed, and if they wanted to walk out, even a small step would be very difficult. Yang Qindong, who was once a soldier, understood this history too well. It was because he understood so much that his life's goal was to strengthen the Han people and allow the country, which was mainly Han people, to stand at the top of the world one day. However, it was clear that this was a beautiful dream. Perhaps it would come true one day, but it would require the combined efforts of many generations. He couldn't satisfy this in his previous life. The heavens gave him a chance and allowed him to come to the middle of the great Ming dynasty, which was still considered powerful. Most importantly, they gave him Datsang, a freakish existence. If he had such advanced knowledge, science and ideas, but still continued to advance step by step with Confucianism, he would be letting down everything. Yang Qindong needed to quickly rise up and stand at the top of the world. He wanted the Han people to be above everything else. Because of Datsang he had such strength. However, the world was so big and he didn't know how long it would take to conquer it. However, even if he knew that the world was very big, Yang Qindong still had to do it. Moreover, he could only do it sooner rather than later. It might take many years, but if he just thought about it and didn't do anything, it would become a task that could never be completed. A journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. Yang Qindong decided to act, so he had to increase his speed and quicken his pace. And now, although it was feasible to use cold weapons against cold weapons, at least this way, the pressure on the munitions factory behind him wouldn't be so great. However, what kind of price would he have to pay to achieve this goal? The young soldiers who joined the Yang family army did everything they could to let their parents, wives and children eat and wear warm clothes, to let them have something to rely on, and to let them live a better life. For this goal, they dared to use their lives on the battlefield, obtaining victory after victory. These people had even sacrificed their lives. Looking at Yang Qindong, he was actually willing to sacrifice lives just to reduce the pressure on the munitions factory and reduce the cost of advanced firearms. From this point of view, he was completely putting the cart before the horse. These were all good men and could not be bought with any amount of money. How could they be compared with an emotionless flintlock? This battle could be considered to have given Yang Qindong a great shock. It was also from this battle that he had a clearer understanding of what he needed and what he should give. Chapter 439. Early in the morning, in the courtyard of the mercenary camp, 7,000 Yang family soldiers stood in their respective lines. In front of them were the corpses of 63 temporary auxiliary soldiers. Beside them, there were a few dozen heavily injured comrades carried on stretchers, as well as hundreds of others wrapped in bandages. These were the soldiers who had died in the battle last night. Now, all the dead soldiers had been carried out, and the corpses had been put on some simple makeup to make them look less tragic. The other injured comrades were scattered around. This scene stunned all the auxiliary soldiers and temporary auxiliary soldiers except for the elite soldiers, Cold Vanguard. Their faces were filled with confusion. Lung Feng naturally knew what was going on. In the previous battle on Ryukyu Island, there were also examples of comrades sacrificing themselves. The auxiliary soldiers were a little better. Most of them had heard about the death ceremony when they joined the army in Crimson City. It was said that this ceremony would allow their souls to ascend to heaven and stop suffering. They even said that this ceremony was called a memorial service. They had only heard about it but had never actually experienced it. The temporary auxiliary soldiers were completely stunned. They had never heard of it and had never seen it with their own eyes. At this moment they stood there with a look of confusion. Perhaps in their minds they had clearly won a great victory last night, so why did they make everyone look so solemn? What was going on? In the eyes of others, defeating 20,000 enemies with less than 400 casualties, killing 5,000, and capturing 7,000 was naturally a great victory. But in Lung Feng's eyes, this victory was nothing. Fortunately, most of them had used cold weapons yesterday. If they had used the 9-5 sword, this battle would not have been considered a victory. At most, it would have been a draw. The Yang family soldiers were all gathered here. At the same time, the 7,000 captives were all escorted here. According to Yang Qindong, this was a pre-battle education. If this method was used well, it would have an unexpected effect. Everyone was present. The commander of Lung Feng's 2nd Regiment, Luo Pe, ran in front of Yang Qindong, who was in his commander's uniform, and gave a very standard military salute. Comrade Commander, all the members of the memorial service have gathered. Please give your instructions. Please be at ease, Yang Chendong said solemnly. He put on the marshal's uniform that he had kept in the large warehouse to show his respect for this ceremony. Just like Luo Per and the group of officers, they had also changed out of their combat camouflage uniforms and put on regular clothes to show their solemnity and might. In fact, after these officers changed into their normal uniforms, they did indeed look very impressive. Many of the soldiers who were charging towards the Imperial Army made up their minds to perform well in the future and get themselves an official uniform. How impressive would it be when they returned to their hometowns? As for Yang Chendong, when he strode to the center of the temporary stage, the entire camp fell silent. At that moment, there was only one person in the eyes of tens of thousands of people. There was only one sound in the ears of tens of thousands of people, and that was Yang Chendong and what he was about to say. Dear comrades did not use a script. Yang Chendong chose to give an impromptu speech. Fortunately, he had experienced many such occasions in his previous life, so he already had a rough idea of what to say. However, it was a different era. Today he used a practical speech. The target scanned the entire place, not even letting go of the Miao army captives who were still tied up. Then he said in a solemn voice, Dear comrades, last night the Miao army suddenly launched a fierce attack on our camp. In the face of the test of life and death, all of you made a heroic performance and handed in a perfect answer sheet. Relying on your courage, you defeated your opponents and won the victory. You are the best and I am proud to have all of you. Salute. First of all, the victory of last night was affirmed. This made all the soldiers who participated in the battle puff out their chests. Everyone's face was filled with pride. But Yang Chendong's tone changed and his voice became a lot deeper. Some of our dear comrades and brothers sacrificed their lives to protect their dignity in the battle last night. They sacrificed their lives in exchange for victory. It is because of their heroic sacrifice that we have achieved our glorious and great victory. Today we are deeply mourning our beloved comrades. They are Zhang Hongdong from 1st Platoon, 1st Company of the 1st Auxiliary Battalion. Li Kaixian from 2nd Platoon, 1st Company of the 1st Auxiliary Battalion. Ren Zhuzi from 2nd Platoon, 1st Company of the 1st Platoon, 2nd Company of the 1st Auxiliary Battalion. Yang Weisong from 3rd Platoon, 1st Company of the 1st 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 Platoon, 1st Company of the 63 names were read out by Yang Chendong one by one. Every time he read out a name, a soldier's corpse behind him would be covered with a white sheet. When he finished reading out all the names, there were already soft sobbing sounds coming from the scene. Those who had tears in their eyes and could not help but cry were the friends and family of the dead soldiers. They were originally members of the Huang Bandit Army. They were citizens of the southern Ming dynasty. However, they lost their homes in the war and could not survive. They had no choice but to join the army to make a living. However, in the end, no one knew whether they were lucky or unlucky. They became captives of the mercenaries and after a strict selection, they became temporary auxiliary soldiers. In last night's battle, after such a long period of psychological education and strict training, the temporary auxiliary soldiers showed a good performance. They displayed their valiant side completely and finally won the battle. However, in the end, because the enemy's numbers were too great and they didn't have much combat experience, 63 people died in the battle. It was war after all. People died. Everyone who participated in the battle was already prepared for this. Furthermore, they achieved such a great victory. Only 63 people died and less than 400 were injured. No matter how one looked at it, it was a great victory. Needless to say, when the results of the battle were tabulated, many temporary auxiliary soldiers were given military merits because of their excellent performance. Some were directly promoted from temporary auxiliary soldiers to auxiliary soldiers. Some were focused on training among the temporary auxiliary soldiers and became the vice squad leader. There were also some who made military merits and were rewarded with silver tails. This good side quickly washed away the sadness of losing their comrades. Not to mention, they also heard that the higher-ups would actively search for the families of the deceased comrades. Once they were found, they would definitely be given a very generous pension. This was already enough. At least, this kind of treatment was not available in other armies. But even so, the memorial service was still held. The young man who was said to be the highest official read out everyone's name. This honor was probably something that none of the temporary auxiliary soldiers would have thought of. Such a glorious scene, such a solemn memorial service, how could they not be moved and even shed tears? In fact, before they joined the temporary auxiliary soldiers, most of these people did not even have a decent name. Stone, Goshing, Taidan were their titles. This was also because their families were too poor and it was said that a cheap name was easy to support. It was only after they joined the temporary auxiliary soldiers that they were given new names with the help of their instructors. Now, these new names would go with them. Presumably, if the dead really had a spirit, these 63 comrades would be able to rest in peace after seeing this scene. There were even more people who thought that if they could have such a solemn memorial service on the day they died, they would be satisfied. Now that he had come to this world, he was able to be remembered by others in an upright manner. This was something that he had never dared to think about in the past. Future generations would also be proud of this scene today. This scene also shocked the 7,000 captives of the Miao army. Although they had the name of the Miao army, very few of them were actually Miao, perhaps only 1/10 of them. The other 6,000 some were Han that the Miao army had recruited along the way. To these people, there was no sense of belonging or loyalty at all. Originally when they joined, it was just to fill their stomachs and survive. If not for the fact that they were all in their 20s and were stronger than the other young men, even if they wanted to join the Miao army temporarily, they would not be given the opportunity to do so. It was said that the most important symbol of the Ming dynasty's prosperity was the increase in population. After experiencing the resurgence of Taizu Zhu Yuanzhang, Qingzu Zhu Di and Ren Xuanji, the population of the Ming dynasty had reached a peak. The southwest had also not experienced the flames of war for a long time, so there were still many men in the prime of their lives. This was why Yang Qindong had taken a fancy to them and had intentionally walked out of the capital of Baiming. The great man had once said that many hands made light work. For Yang Qindong, who wanted to send the Han to the apex of the world, high-quality manpower was something that he urgently needed and could not let go of. Putting aside the physical condition of these people, the scene in front of them had completely shocked them. Although most of these people had never been on the battlefield, and even if they had only recently come into contact with war, but had they not seen pigs run before? Had they not eaten pork before? When had they ever heard of anyone giving such preferential treatment to dead soldiers? What kind of army was this? At this moment, a huge question mark had appeared in everyone's mind. In fact, it was not just the 6,000 some Han who were shocked. Even the 700 or so Miao soldiers were stunned. Because of geographical reasons, the Miao people had been entangled with the Han for many years. There were also many cases of intermarriage in private. It was truly a case of I am in you, I am in you. It seemed that there was no way to verify who was the pure-blooded Miao. It was precisely because they were too close to the Han that they could not distinguish between each other. This time, if Zhu Qizhen of Ying's sect had not been hot-headed and wanted to levy heavy taxes in the southwest to support his new army to fight the northern Ming, they would not have suddenly launched an attack under the King of Min's persuasion if they were not forced to the point where they could not survive. In the end, they did not have any ill feelings towards the great Ming. It was just that their living conditions were too bad and they had no choice but to rebel. Chapter 440. However, regardless of whether they were 100% Miao people or not, they rarely came into contact with war. It was only because they were Miao people that they were valued and trusted more by Miao Jinlong. Hence, they were in a better position during the war. However, when it came to knowledge, they were no different from the other people of the great Ming dynasty. Just like the scene in front of them, they were also shocked. Although their hands were tied, it did not prevent them from widening their eyes to look at everything in front of them. They wanted to see what these mercenaries were up to. Under the gaze of more than 10,000 people, Yang Qindong finished reading the eulogy. Then he took off his military cap and shouted to the audience, "Fire the gun and mourn for our dead comrades for 3 minutes." After that, Yang Qindong was the first to take the initiative to lower his head, followed by Tiger's Mane, Beta Persei, and the others beside him. Then it was Commander Luo Pe, Political Commissar Kong Jie, and a group of Lung Feng auxiliary soldiers and temporary auxiliary soldiers. More than 7,000 people lowered their heads at the same time to mourn for their dead comrades. The scene was so grand and solemn that it shocked the 7,000 captives. At this moment, their hearts seemed to have been pierced deeply by something, making it difficult for them to breathe. Bang bang bang! Captain Chiu V of the 1st Guard Unit and Captain Dao Xiao of the 2nd Guard Unit led a group of team members and began to fire the gun, sending their comrades on their way to heaven. Under the sound of gunfire, especially the continuous firing of bullets, the 7,000 captives received a re-education process in their hearts. Come, cremate the 63 martyrs and send their bones back to the monument of heroes in the city. In the future they will forever be worshipped by future generations. Their names will also be engraved on the heroes list for their descendants to pay homage to and for the world to remember. Under Yang Qindong's roar, piles of torches were lit and the 63 corpses were burning. No one knew if it was an illusion, but at this moment, many people seemed to see a breeze blowing over these burning corpses. It was as if their souls were really liberated, either going to heaven or reincarnating to a better world. The memorial service was over, but the significance of this symbol was far from over. This was equivalent to a big lesson, and every step was deeply knocked on everyone's heart. At this moment, it seemed that the onlookers were no longer afraid of death. In their minds, after death, their souls had a place to stay. What was there to be afraid of? Soldiers dying on the battlefield, wasn't this a kind of fate? On the contrary, what if they did not die and could survive? Didn't that mean that there would be more good days in the future? Even if they were dead, their families would have someone to rely on. Furthermore, their chances of survival were still very high. At this moment, all the soldiers to the army's morale, at this moment the entire army's army. The memorial service was also a shock to the 7,000 captives. They had never seen or even heard of such a ceremony before, and it deeply stimulated them. Chiu chiu with chiu chiu with chiu to percent v chiu with chiu chiu chiu. After all, they were about to expand into the southwest region. If they had the help of these locals, especially the Miao people, they would be able to achieve twice the results with half the effort. Yang Qindong already had such a plan and Kong Jie had volunteered. There was no reason for him to refuse. With a wave of his hand, he indicated that as long as they had a clean background and weren't evil people, he would consider taking them in as temporary auxiliary soldiers. At the same time, he promised them that if they performed well, they would be given the same opportunity to compete with other temporary auxiliary soldiers. Kong Jie, who had been thinking about the situation, left to carry out the order. Then, with the instructors and company instructors as the backbone and some soldiers who were good at talking, they formed small groups and went deep into the captives. They began to investigate the past of these captives and filter out potential recruits. Under such a strong psychological attack, the Han people who originally did not have much of a sense of belonging quickly accepted the change. Once the first step was taken, the rest of the matters would be easy to handle. Not long after, the captive soldiers began to change their allegiance. Even some of the Miao people were convinced by them. Perhaps they knew from the start that no matter who became the emperor and conquered the country, it would not have much to do with them. Since that was the case, they might as well follow the mercenaries in front of them. They had heard from the auxiliary soldiers of Lung Feng that their families were living a rich and beautiful life. Some of the things that came out of their mouths were things that the captives had never even heard of before. However, when they saw these people describing everything with a straight face, and everyone saying more or less the same thing, they believed them. Not to mention that what was said was true, even if it was a lie, it was not uncommon for it to become true after a lot of people said it. Of course, not everyone could be taken in as temporary auxiliary soldiers. After investigating and encouraging people to report and expose them, they still found some people with bad natures. Among them were Miao people and Han people. Not long ago, when they attacked the cities of the southern Ming dynasty, they did many bad things like burning, killing, and looting. Once these people were found, Kong Jie would sentence them according to their evil deeds. In Chichen City, the relevant laws were gradually being perfected. There were also some rules that stated what kind of crime a person committed and what kind of punishment they would receive. According to this request, the punishment was placed on these villains. Immediately, more than 100 people were sentenced to death, and more than 600 people were sentenced to reform through labor for different terms. Those who were sentenced to death were directly executed in the military camp. Over 100 swords fell, and over 100 heads fell to the ground. Over 100 people died. As for those who were reformed through labor, they were all escorted to Lijiu Prefecture behind them. At the border of the coast, the Yangshi Navy had already sent ships to wait there. They brought over many new weapons and ammunition from the munitions factory. Other than these 600+ criminals who had done something wrong, there were also over 1,000 Han and Miao people who did not want to join the temporary auxiliary army because they did not meet the requirements or did not understand the situation. These people would all be sent to the small glass island. When they arrived there, those who should serve their sentences would serve their sentences and atone for their sins through labor. The others would also be sent to other units and factories that needed them. In the end, out of the 7,000 captives, only 5,000 were allowed to join the temporary auxiliary soldiers. Even so, this result was enough to make Yang Qindong very satisfied. After a battle, they had learned a lesson and experience. The strength of the military had also been strengthened. No matter how one looked at it, it was worth it. At the same time, the 5,000 people who were accepted were also very happy. Not to mention what they had learned in the past few days that made them have a good impression of the mercenaries, just the basic necessities of life had greatly improved. They just casually took one out. The shoes they usually wore were straw sandals. In the Ming dynasty, only officials and rich people could wear leather boots or long boots. In the 25th year of Hanggu, the imperial court further decreed that commoners, merchants, craftsmen, soldiers and odd-job workers were strictly prohibited from wearing boots. They could only wear leather boots. Only in the cold northern regions were they allowed to wear leather boots. Those who disobeyed would be punished with death. As for the ordinary commoners, they mainly wore straw sandals and leather boots. They were just ordinary shoes and leggings. Walking with such shoes naturally wouldn't be a problem. However, if one wanted to travel for a long time, it would easily cause problems. Many times when one went on a long journey, one would have to bring several pairs of shoes. There was no guarantee that they wouldn't break or that there wouldn't be a time when one was barefoot. Let's look at what kind of shoes the mercenaries wore. Forget about cloth shoes, the lowest were rubber shoes. The garment factory copied the rubber shoes provided by Yang Qindong. Due to the seriousness of the people at that time, coupled with the fact that there wasn't a trace of laziness in the workmanship, such shoes were much sturdier. The more powerful ones, like the elite soldiers of the Cold Vanguard, wore high-waisted leather boots. They would even dare to charge through a mountain of blades and a sea of flames. Once a temporary auxiliary soldier joined, they would immediately be given 2 pairs of rubber shoes the size of their feet and a set of extremely resistant green training uniform without any military rank. Just based on this, who knew how many people were attracted to this place? This was all caused by poverty. If the commoners were wealthy and accustomed to a stable life, then even if someone wanted to rebel, they wouldn't be able to do much. Speaking of which, in terms of lessons and experience after a cold weapon battle, Yang Qindong saw his own shortcomings. When the weapons used by everyone weren't too different, no matter how well prepared you were, there would still be casualties on the battlefield. Thus, how to prevent such a thing from happening became a problem that Yang Qindong had to seriously consider. After calling over Commander Luo Per of the 2nd Cold Vanguard Regiment and Commander Lu Jua of the Auxiliary Regiment, they finally decided after a round of discussion. In the future, whenever there was a war, the Cold Vanguard Regiment wouldn't need to use any cold weapons to fight. They would directly use the Type 95 to overwhelm the enemy, except for special circumstances. As for the auxiliary soldiers, they would be allocated a Type 81 assault rifle in normal times, while the other 2 would use strong crossbows. During wartime, each person would have a crossbow. In short, they would be able to protect themselves and kill the enemy. As for the temporary auxiliary soldiers, their loyalty had yet to be tested, and their strength had yet to be proven. Thus, they could only be given some steel knives and spears. Of course, the quality of these steel knives was different from the ones used by the Ming Dynasty soldiers. They were also harder. In fact, when they were fighting, they might even be able to chop the opponent's large knife in half and gain the advantage. Since it was a battlefield, there would always be casualties. A temporary auxiliary soldier was like a big fish that had to jump through the gate. Only when you fully displayed your advantages and truly gained everyone's recognition would you be able to become an official auxiliary soldier and enjoy the qualifications to use advanced firearms. Chapter 441. What was comforting was that when Luo Per announced these rules and regulations on behalf of the military, no one stood out to oppose it. It seemed that this was unfair to some people. However, if one wanted to succeed and gain something, how could he reap without putting in the effort? For those who were not capable, even if you gave them the 95 style, they might not be able to survive on the cruel battlefield. Strict hierarchy was necessary in many cases, especially in the military. There was no clear hierarchy. On the battlefield, one had to listen to someone else. Once an army had 2 or more voices, no matter how powerful it would not be far from destruction. Yang Qindong was still digesting the captives who had just joined the temporary auxiliary army. Fortunately, such things had happened before. Whether it was the grievance meeting, all kinds of ideological education, strict training, better food, better treatment, cohesiveness, sense of loyalty, etc., all of these had played a big role. Yang Chendong believed that in at most half a month, these 5,000 new soldiers would be integrated into this big family. In addition to the originally disorganized organization, there should be no problem with the soldiers and fighting strength under the guidance of the old and the new. The mercenaries were actively making preparations here. The other forces were not idle either. Miao Jinlong suffered a great loss in the hands of the mercenaries. Scholar Zhou's words were more important to him. The king of Miao, who was almost as obedient as the king of Miao, first adopted a defensive posture and firmly controlled his nearly 60,000 troops in the military camp. At the same time, he sent people to ask the king of Min for provisions, reinforcements, and countermeasures. The king of Min's base camp temporarily chose Pingyue Mansion as the corner. To the east of Pingyue Mansion was Xiaozhou Mansion. After that, they would be at the forefront, which was also Ganzhou Mansion, where the king of Yangzhong, Zhu Huilu, was at the vanguard. The biggest advantage of living in Pingyue Mansion was that they could attack and retreat without worrying about personal safety. From this point alone, it could be seen that the king of Min, Zhu Huilu, was still very afraid of death. In history, Zhu Huiliang was described as a very unbearable person. After the death of his father, Zhu Huiliang, his two younger brothers, Zhu Huiliang, the prince of Guangdong, and Zhu Huiliang, the prince of Yangzhong, were not on good terms with him, causing serious internal friction. In the end, they were suspected by the imperial court and did not have a good ending. However, history was history after all. It was also written by people and limited by various objective factors. Sometimes, it even depended on the personal interests of the historian. Just like Yongzheng of the Qing dynasty in the future, there were all kinds of opinions about whether or not he was the legitimate successor to the throne. However, this did not prevent him from becoming the bridge between the Kangxi and Qianlong dynasties. Zhu Huihua was the one who was underestimated by history. Otherwise, how could he inherit the title of King of Min? Perhaps some people would say that it was a matter of course for the eldest son to inherit the throne, but how many eldest sons did not live to the day when they should stand up? Not only did Zhu Huihua survive to this point, but he was also able to gather such an army that could resist the southern Ming Empire and force them to retreat step by step. This was already a kind of ability. Different from Miao Jinlong, Zhu Huihua naturally had a lot of talented people around him. Not to mention that his two younger brothers were helping him, he also had a lot of civil and military officials under him. Just speaking of this period of time, he had also recruited a lot of elites and talents. For example, Yen Tao, one of the original chief arresters of the Ministry of Justice who escaped from Baiming's capital, was now working under him. Yen Tao had listened to Wu Yang's words. In addition, his immediate superior Yu Shiyue and Yang Chendong were not on good terms. Thus, he thought that riches and honor could only be found in danger, so he walked on a tightrope. However, Yang Chendong's strength was too strong. In the end, he had to admit defeat and leave his hometown. After a while, he heard about the rise of King of Min and came over to seek refuge. Zhu Huihua, who was in urgent need of people, arranged for him to be by his side. He was one of the guards. Sometimes, when it came to people and things related to Baiming, he would also ask for his opinion. In addition to Yen Tao, there were also people sent by Baiming. Zhou Quan, the adopted son of Lv Gue, the commander of Baiming's genie guards, was also working for King of Min. Different from Yen Tao, he could not be seen in the light. He could only come forward to give advice in secret or on some important matters. When a person's ability was too strong, he would make some friends and inevitably offend some enemies. For example, some people in Baiming had been looking forward to his death. In their view, only when Yang Chendong died could they have a day of success. Only then could Dai Zong truly and completely control the imperial power. Some people could then share the various benefits brought by power with Dai Zong and Zhu Qiyu. Zhou Quan was sent by Lv Gue. Of course, Zhu Qiyu also knew about his arrival. Moreover, he was a supporter who turned a blind eye to it. To put it bluntly, he also hoped that Yang Chendong could die. It would be best if he could die in the territory of the southern Ming dynasty. In that case, he could make a big fuss. It was precisely because of the arrival of Zhou Quan and Yen Tao that King of Min, Zhu Huihua, had a more intuitive understanding of Yang Chendong. After receiving Miao Jinlong's battle report, he did not immediately send reinforcements. Instead, he asked these two to help him analyze the current situation. In a side hall of the temporary King of Min's mansion, Zhu Huihua looked at Zhou Quan and Yen Tao with great interest and asked, "You two have always said that this Duke of Loyalty is a tiger. Now we are going to face him. Do you have any better suggestions?" By the way, not only do we value him but also the Daizong Emperor values him. Even the prodigal Zhu Qizhen values him. I have already received the news that Nanjing seems to have agreed to give Yang Qindong the title of king. Before listening to their opinions, Zhu Huihua first told them all the news he had received. From this point of view, it was not a day or two that he had the intention to rebel. It seemed that he had arranged a lot of people in the imperial court of the southern Ming dynasty. Hearing this, Zhou Quan and Yen Tao first looked at each other. They were a little frightened by Zhu Huihua's power. In particular, Zhou Quan also wondered if King of Min had also arranged some people in Baiming. Of course he would not ask such a thought, let alone say it out loud. The two sides were now in the stage of cooperation. On the surface they needed to be sincere and united. Since Zhu Huihua asked as a subordinate and a helper, the two had to speak. But before speaking, Zhou Quan, who was from the brocade guard, asked a question first. Your Highness King of Min, isn't there news that Yang Qindong was assassinated and poisoned and will not live for long? It was not strange for Zhou Quan to ask such a question. Although the powerful Great Ming dynasty was divided into the north and south, because of the short time, many yamens still had connections with each other. Especially important departments like the brocade guard, it was impossible to be divided so clearly in such a short time. It was not strange for Zhou Quan to know about the news that Yang Qindong was assassinated and poisoned in the southern Ming brocade guard. That's right. Zhu Huihua nodded. I also heard such a thing. But isn't he still alive? As long as he is not dead, he is worth paying attention to. Moreover, sometimes the dead can make a comeback. Zhu Huihua's words were not completely groundless. It was only because of his cautious personality. This was also because he had heard many stories. One of them had been told by Yang Qindong himself. Back in the immortal abode of Baiming's capital, he had appeared as the ancestor of storytellers to talk about the three kingdoms. It was said that in order to harm Bemei, a powerful official of the Wei kingdom at the time, the deceased Zhuge Liang had purposely made a blank book soaked in poison, saying it was a heavenly book. In the end, he had tricked Bemei and poisoned him to death. This was the famous example of a dead man killing a living man. Of course, all of this was just an unofficial legend. It could not be taken seriously. This was also something that Yang Qindong had said back then in order to raise the immortal abode's reputation. Unexpectedly, Zhu Huihua had heard it and taken it seriously. With this explanation, Zhou Quan nodded. He did not want to dwell on this matter any further. It was just as people said. As long as a person was not dead, it could not be taken seriously. Besides, with Yang Qindong's craftiness, it was hard to say what the inside story was. Since they couldn't talk about whether or not Yang Qindong was going to die, they could only treat him as an opponent. Thinking up to this point, Zhou Quan cupped his fists and said respectfully, Your Highness Prince of Min, as far as we know, Yang Qindong is an extremely formidable person. Back then he had defeated the Walla's army with only a few hundred men. We must be careful when facing such an opponent. As soon as Zhou Quan finished speaking, Yen Tao also expressed his agreement and added, Brother Zhou is right. This Duke of Loyalty is not easy to deal with, especially when it comes to leading troops. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been able to annihilate young Master Huang's forces in less than 2 months. We need to be more cautious when dealing with him. Both of them were extremely cautious. Zhu Huihua nodded in agreement. Then what do the two of you think we should do next? Are we not going to fight back? It would be best if we don't fight back. Yen Tao nodded. Zhou Quan couldn't help but frown when he heard Yen Tao's suggestion. His mission was to do everything possible to kill Yang Qindong, Baiming's greatest threat. Now that this person had taken the initiative to become Prince of Min's enemy, it was the best time to eliminate him. How could he tolerate doing nothing? Yen Tao had already seen Zhou Quan's expression from the corner of his eyes. Of course he knew what Zhou Quan was thinking. Therefore he chuckled and said to Zhu Huihua, Your Highness Prince of Min, the strength of the mercenary army was clearly stated in Miao Jinlong's secret letter. 20,000 Miao soldiers were a surprise attack, but they were defeated by 7,000 people. Even if we were to face such an opponent, it would be very difficult to deal with them. If we have too few soldiers, it would be difficult to deal with them in one go. However, if we have too many soldiers, it would give the Southern Ming Empire a chance to breathe. This would be very disadvantageous to the overall situation. Chapter 442. Nodding his head, Zhu Huijin asked seriously, Then according to General Yen, what should we do? Yen Tao was one of Zhu Huijin's guards, and he was given the position of General of the Guards. It was reasonable to call him General Yen. It was also because he was trusted by King Min that Yen Tao decided to assist him sincerely. Hearing his master's question, he confidently raised 2 fingers and said, "It's simple. Against such a strong opponent, we have to work together openly and covertly to suppress him." Work together openly and covertly? Interesting, let's hear it. Zhu Huijin asked with interest. He knew that Yen Tao was once Yang Qindong's opponent. What kind of person understood you the best? It was usually your opponent. Zhou Quan originally wanted to interrupt. At least he would not allow Yen Tao to do as he said and not do anything to Yang Qindong. If that was the case, how could he complete his mission? However, now that he heard about the 2 methods, one in the open and one in the dark, his curiosity was piqued. He suppressed the words he wanted to say and looked at Yen Tao. It's simple. On the bright side, we can send people to the vicinity of Gaozhou Prefecture and use the army to surround it. We can use this to tell the Duke of Loyalty that we are not to be trifled with. If he really wants to work for the Southern Ming Empire, then it is very likely that he will fight to the death. In the end, no one will end up well. Presumably, as long as he is a smart person, he will not act rashly. This will also create an opportunity for us to work on the dark side. What's the dark side? Zhu Huijin asked impatiently. He had a feeling that Yen Tao did not come up with this idea on the spur of the moment. He was afraid that he had already prepared for this. As expected, Yen Tao's next words confirmed Zhu Huijin's thoughts. On the dark side, we can assassinate Yang Qindong. I have already chosen the person. He is called Immortality. His martial arts are strong and he is a native of Jianghu. He also served in the Jianghu army. Later on, when he was severely punished for doing something wrong, I saved him and arranged for him to stay in Gaozhou Prefecture. When speaking of this, Yen Tao's face was calm and composed, as if he was talking about something insignificant. What? You have arranged the people? Is this the assassination of Yang Qin going to the east? But will he find out? This time, Zhou Quan could not hold back and asked a series of questions. In response to Zhou Quan's question, Yen Tao smiled and said, "Don't worry, brother Zhou. Mo Tua went to Gaozhou Prefecture more than a month ago as a refugee and has become friends with many people there. He shouldn't be suspected." Oh, did you foresee today's situation more than a month ago? This time, it was Zhu Huichuan's turn to have a look of disbelief. That's not it. Facing Zhu Huihua, Yen Tao certainly didn't dare to be arrogant. He told the truth. Originally, I arranged this person to get information there, but I didn't expect Yang Qindong to go there. This subordinate had this idea temporarily. Aha, that's a sudden idea, good. For some things, the more unintentional it is, the more likely it is to succeed. If it is not deliberate, there will always be traces left behind. Alright, then let this Mo Tua assassinate Yang Qindong. If he succeeds, then that would be for the best. If he fails, then we won't have to bear the blame. Zhu Huichun laughed a few times and said a few good words. Obviously, he had already approved of this plan in his heart. Your Highness is wise. That is how it should be. It would be best if Mo Tua could kill Yang Qindong. Of course, in this subordinate's opinion, it would be very difficult to do so. This Duke of Loyalty has many experts protecting him. Fortunately, it doesn't matter if it doesn't work out. As long as Mo Ta dies, all the blame can be pushed to the Jianghu people. At that time, Your Highness only needs to send someone to explain to Yang Qindong, and you can also promise to let him seek revenge from the Jianghu people. In this way, when 2 tigers fight, one will definitely be injured and we can reap the benefits. That's right. At that time, no matter who wins or loses, they will be greatly injured. It will be much easier to deal with them. Zhu Huiyu couldn't help but nod. Seeing Yen Tao so confident, he felt gratified in his heart, but at the same time he asked with some concern, if the assassin didn't succeed and was caught instead, wouldn't it be bad if he gave you up? For Zhu Huijin to ask such a question, it was enough to show that he had seriously considered this matter and even agreed. Yen Tao was overjoyed. He cupped his fists and said, Your Highness, please rest assured. This subordinate has already made arrangements. Once Mo Ta attacks, regardless of whether he lives or dies, he will not be able to survive. Since Yen Tao said this, he clearly had complete confidence. Zhu Huijin relaxed. Good. Since that is the case, this prince will immediately arrange for Xuanzhou's general, Lu Dedeo, to lead 30,000 soldiers to the Guanghai Guard. First, we will take control of that place. This way we will form an encirclement. It will not be easy for this loyal duke to escape. After the assassination, I will send Qin Tian to negotiate. I think this matter will be successful. Qin Tian was known for his eloquence. He was also one of Zhu Huijin's capable officials. As far as Zhu Huijin was concerned, he was very satisfied with Yan Tao's plan. The key point was that not only could he use this opportunity to deal with Yang Qindong, even if the matter did not succeed, he could ignite the flames of war between Jiaoji and Yang Qindong. Jiaoji agreed to send troops and did send troops. This caused the king of Min's faction's reputation to soar. They seemed to be a great help. However, in reality, Jiaoji had made all sorts of demands in this period of time. Although they were not excessive, Zhu Huijin felt that if he did not stop them, it would not be long before the other party's appetite was not something he could satisfy. At that time, a civil war would inevitably erupt. Since this was the case, releasing Yang Qindong early and letting them fight a war of attrition would only be beneficial to him. As for who would win and whether the king of Min's faction would suffer a great loss after losing Jiaoji, Zhu Huijin was not very worried. From Yunnan to Guangxi and then to Guangdong, he had seen through the southern Ming strength. Furthermore, he had taken the opportunity to expand his army by hundreds of thousands. At this moment he was not as afraid as before. Even without the help of the Jiaoji army, he was confident that he could take on the southern Ming army. If things went well, even if he defeated them, it would not be a problem for him to replace them. Since this was the case, this plan was definitely feasible. Zhou Quan, who was standing at the side, did not say anything. Because regardless of whether it was the assassination or the battle between Jiaoji and Yang Qindong, this was equivalent to helping him complete his mission. Since this was the case, what else was there to worry about? Yan Tao's plan was approved just like that. Next, he would send someone to inform Mo Ta in Gaozhou Prefecture and let him find an opportunity to cause trouble. Gaozhou Prefecture. 2 pieces of news, one good and one bad, were sent to the Minister of War, Kuang Yi. The bad news was that the king of Min's faction had sent his general, Lu Dedeo, to the Guanghai Guards with 30,000 soldiers. As a result, Gaozhou Prefecture was under attack from 3 sides. Although it was not completely sealed off and there were still some roads leading from Nanjing to Gaozhou Prefecture that had not been taken over, if the imperial court wanted to send reinforcements here, it would be a huge blow. Now that it was surrounded, Kuang Yi knew that it would be difficult to protect Gaozhou Prefecture. Not to mention other things, just the matter of food was enough for the 30 to 40,000 people in Gaozhou Prefecture to worry about. Fortunately, the good news was also sent. Zhu Qizhen finally replied to Kuang Yi's secret report. When the decree was sent to Kuang Yi, he immediately opened it. When he saw the contents, he was half happy and half worried. He was happy that Emperor Yingzong did not immediately reject Yang Qindong's request for the title of King of Min. He was worried that such a big matter had to be discussed with Baiming's substitute Zhu Qiu and that he had to settle the King of Min's rebellion first. Kuang Yi, the minister of the Ministry of War, was very clear about the scale of the rebellion of King of Min as he was involved in it. Not to mention other things, just in terms of scale, with the addition of the Miao army from Yunnan, Guangxi and Guangdong, it already involved 5 million people. In the middle of the Ming dynasty, the population was around 50 million. It had not reached the 60 million at the peak of the late Ming dynasty, but compared to the entire world, it was already a lot. Just the number of people in the rebel army was close to 1 million. If the Miao army and the Jiaoji army were added in, it would be even more. How many troops did Yang Qindong have? There were no more than 10,000 of them. And this was because he had defeated Miao Jinlong and used the prisoners as his soldiers. Speaking of Yang Qindong's expansion of the army, it was actually against the rules. Before, he could use the captives on the battlefield to expand his army because he had the identity of an imperial envoy. He had the power to make arbitrary decisions and take advantage of the situation. There was nothing wrong with doing so. However, right now, his identity as an imperial envoy had been taken away, and his identity had once again become a duke. If he still wanted to expand the army under these circumstances, it was tantamount to a provocation to the imperial power. Just based on this point, Kuang Yi and the others could use this to condemn him. However, the current situation was like this. Kuang Yi and the others could not even protect themselves, so what could they use to criticize Yang Qindong? As such, he could only turn a blind eye to it. If he could get by, then so be it. Speaking of which, how could 10,000 people go against an army of over 1 million people? Even if the mercenaries were strong, with a ratio of 1 to 100, they would be able to exhaust you to death. Of course, unless Yang Qindong was willing to take out the large destructive weapons in the warehouse. However, that was impossible. At least in the war with the Han people, he would not use such powerful weapons. If he wanted to achieve his goal, he needed more Han people to support him. How could he achieve it if he killed them? You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.